The moon hung heavy over the gathering as Elena Voss stood frozen in the center of the circle, every eye in the Blackthorn pack fixed on her, and she could already feel that something about this night had gone terribly wrong. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears, drowning out the whispers spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Damon Ashgrove stood only a few feet away, his broad shoulders tense, his jaw locked tight, and his eyes refusing to meet hers. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating, long before he opened his mouth. She had waited for this moment her entire life. Every wolf in the pack was born knowing that one day, if fate allowed it, they would meet the person whose scent would call to their very soul. Elena had dreamed of this night more times than she could count, imagining warmth, imagining safety, imagining finally belonging somewhere after a lifetime of being looked down upon for her family's fallen name. But the silence stretching between her and Damon was not the silence of destiny fulfilled. It was the silence before a storm. The gathered wolves had arrived hours earlier, filling the clearing with excited chatter about which young wolves might finally find their fated partners this season. Elena had overheard several of them speculating about her own chances, some kind, others less so, wondering aloud whether a wolf from such a disgraced bloodline could truly expect fate to favor her the way it favored those from stronger, more respected families. She had tried to ignore the whispers, focusing instead on the steady thrum of anticipation building in her chest as the ceremony finally began. Nathan, one of the senior council members, stood just behind Damon, his expression unreadable but his presence heavy with intention. Elena had noticed him whispering to Damon before the ceremony began, his tone urgent, his words too quiet to catch. She had told herself it meant nothing. Now, watching Damon's throat move as he swallowed hard, she understood that it had meant everything. Only minutes earlier, Elena had stood at the edge of the gathering, her hands clasped tightly together as Grace adjusted the simple pale dress she had chosen for the ceremony. She had not wanted anything elaborate, only something that felt honest, something that reflected who she truly was rather than who the pack expected her to be. Grace had squeezed her hand tightly before the ceremony began, whispering words of encouragement that now felt like echoes from another lifetime entirely. "You will feel it the moment he arrives," Grace had said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Everyone says the bond announces itself before a single word is spoken. Trust your instincts, Elena. Whatever happens tonight, trust what your heart already knows." Elena had nodded, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of nerves and hope she had rarely allowed herself to feel. She had spent years watching other wolves find their mates, celebrating joyfully while she remained on the outside, wondering if fate had somehow forgotten her family entirely. When Damon had entered the clearing and their eyes had met, something inside her chest had ignited instantly, a warmth spreading through her body that she recognized immediately as the pull other wolves had described so many times before. For one brief, perfect moment, she had allowed herself to believe that everything difficult about her life might finally be resolved. That moment had not lasted. "I reject this bond," Damon said. The words landed like a blow to Elena's chest. For a moment, she was certain she had misheard him, that the roaring in her ears had twisted his voice into something cruel and unfamiliar. But the gasps rippling through the crowd told her otherwise. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into open shock, and Elena felt every gaze in the clearing turn toward her, some pitying, some amused, most simply hungry for the drama unfolding in front of them. "You cannot mean that," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. "Damon, look at me. Please." He finally lifted his eyes, but there was no softness in them, no flicker of the bond she had felt burning inside her from the moment his scent had reached her. Instead, there was only cold calculation, the look of a man who had already decided her fate long before she opened her mouth to plead with him. "Your bloodline is weak," he said, loud enough for the entire pack to hear. "You come from a broken line, a family stripped of honor generations ago. I am the alpha of Blackthorn. I need a mate who strengthens this pack, not one who drags it further into shame." Elena felt her knees threaten to give out beneath her. She had known her family carried a difficult history, whispered about in corners and hidden behind polite smiles, but she had never imagined it would be used as a weapon against her in front of everyone she had ever known. Grace, her closest friend since childhood, pushed through the crowd toward her, but two guards stepped forward and held her back, following orders that had clearly been given long before the ceremony started. "Damon, please," Elena whispered, no longer caring who heard the desperation in her voice. "Don't do this." But Damon had already turned away, already begun speaking to Nathan and the council members gathered behind him, already moving on from the moment, as though Elena were nothing more than an inconvenience to be dealt with and forgotten. The pack elders exchanged quiet nods, satisfied with a decision that had clearly been made behind closed doors long before Elena ever stepped into the circle. A ripple of confusion passed through the council members standing behind Nathan, some exchanging uncertain glances, clearly unprepared for the severity of what he was proposing. Victor, one of the older members, opened his mouth as though to object, then closed it again, apparently deciding against challenging Nathan in front of the entire gathered pack. Elena watched this small hesitation with a distant sort of clarity, understanding that even among those delivering her sentence, doubt lingered somewhere beneath their composed exteriors. "She cannot remain within Packlands," Nathan announced, his voice carrying the practiced calm of someone delivering a verdict rather than a punishment. "A rejected mate weakens the bond of the pack. For the good of Blackthorn, she must leave before sunrise." The words struck Elena harder than the rejection itself. Being cast out did not simply mean losing Damon. It meant losing her home, her friends, the only life she had ever known. It meant being sent into the Forbidden Woods, a place spoken of only in warnings passed from parent to child, a place from which no wolf had ever returned. Grace strained against the guard's grip, her eyes wide with disbelief as she watched the pack elders exchange those satisfied nods. She had known Elena since they were both small pups chasing each other through the training fields, long before either of them understood the weight their family names would eventually carry. She had never once believed the pack would go so far as banishment, not for the simple misfortune of an unwanted bond. "You would send her to die," Grace cried out, finally breaking free from the guards holding her. "She has done nothing wrong. This is cruelty, not justice." But her protest fell on deaf ears. The council had already made its decision, and no amount of pleading would change minds that had closed themselves off the moment Elena's bloodline had been mentioned. Elena felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of the pack that had just humiliated her so completely. She lifted her chin, forcing her voice to remain steady even as her entire world crumbled beneath her feet. "Fine," she said quietly. "I will go." She turned and walked toward the edge of the clearing without looking back, ignoring the whispers that followed her every step, ignoring the pitying glances from wolves who had once called themselves her friends but now stood silently by, too afraid to challenge the alpha's decision. Grace tried to follow her, but Elena shook her head, silently telling her friend to stay behind. There was nothing left to gain from dragging anyone else into the darkness waiting for her beyond the pack borders. As she reached the edge of the territory, Elena allowed herself one final glance back at the world she was leaving behind. Damon stood exactly where she had left him, his expression unreadable, his posture stiff and unmoving. For a brief moment, she thought she saw something flicker across his face, something that almost resembled doubt, but then he turned away, speaking once more with the council, and the moment vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Elena stepped past the boundary markers, feeling the invisible weight of the pack's protection lift from her shoulders the instant she crossed into unclaimed land. The night air grew colder immediately, the shadows beneath the trees deeper and more menacing than she remembered from the stories told around childhood campfires. She wrapped her arms around herself, forcing one foot in front of the other, refusing to let fear stop her from moving forward. Hours passed as she walked, the moon rising higher above the treetops, casting pale silver light through gaps in the canopy. Every sound made her flinch, every rustle of leaves sending her heart racing. She had grown up hearing stories about the creatures said to inhabit the Forbidden Woods, ancient things that predated even the oldest wolf bloodlines, but she had never truly believed those stories until now, alone and unprotected in the very place they warned against entering. She thought back to her childhood, to evenings spent sitting beside her mother near a small fire, while stories of the old world were told in hushed, careful tones. Her mother had always grown quiet whenever the conversation turned toward the family's fallen standing, changing the subject with practiced ease whenever young Elena asked too many questions. At the time, she had assumed it was simple embarrassment, the kind every family carried about some distant, forgotten mistake. Walking now through the darkest part of the woods, she wondered for the first time whether that silence had concealed something far heavier than shame. A twig snapped somewhere to her left, and Elena froze instantly, her breath catching in her throat as she scanned the darkness for movement. For a long moment, nothing stirred, only the soft whisper of wind through skeletal branches overhead. She forced herself to keep walking, telling herself it was simply an animal, nothing more, though every instinct screamed that something was watching her from within the deeper shadows of the forest. The path beneath her feet grew rougher the further she traveled, roots twisting up from the earth like grasping fingers, stones slick with moss threatening to send her sprawling with every uncertain step. She stumbled twice, catching herself against the rough bark of ancient trees whose trunks seemed wider than anything she had ever seen within Blackthorn's more carefully tended forests. This place had grown wild and untouched for longer than she could imagine, undisturbed by wolf or hunter alike. At one point, she paused beside a shallow stream to drink, her hands trembling as she cupped the cold water and brought it to her lips. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark surface, hollow-eyed and pale, barely recognizable as the hopeful young woman who had walked into the moon ceremony, believing her life was about to begin. She almost laughed at the bitter irony, wondering if this was truly how everything would end, alone beside a nameless stream in a forest that swallowed wolves whole. Exhaustion began to weigh on her limbs, each step heavier than the last. She had not eaten since morning, and the emotional toll of the night had drained whatever strength remained in her body. Still, she pushed forward, unwilling to stop moving, even as the trees around her grew thicker, older, their twisted branches forming a canopy so dense that barely any moonlight reached the forest floor. She thought of Damon's cold eyes as he had delivered his rejection, comparing them to the warmth she had briefly felt when they first met beneath the moonlight only hours earlier. It seemed impossible that the same man could contain both, that whatever bond had briefly flared to life between them could be so easily crushed beneath the weight of outside pressure and old prejudice. She wondered whether he had truly felt nothing when their eyes first met, or whether he had simply chosen to bury that feeling beneath the demands of his counsel. Either possibility left her with the same hollow ache settling deep within her chest. A distant howl echoed somewhere far behind her, carried faintly on the night wind, and Elena could not tell whether it came from a wolf mourning her exile or something else entirely. Some creature native to these forbidden lands that had noticed a lone traveler wandering where none dared to tread. She quickened her pace despite her exhaustion, unwilling to discover the answer to that particular question. The trees here had grown so tightly together that Elena often had to turn sideways to slip between their trunks, thorned vines catching at her already torn dress with every careful step forward. Somewhere far above, an owl called out once, a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo far longer than it should have, bouncing between trunks until it faded into an unsettling silence that pressed against her ears like a physical weight. It was near dawn when Elena finally stumbled, her legs giving out beneath her as she collapsed onto the cold earth. She tried to push herself back up, but her body refused to cooperate, every muscle screaming in protest. Tears finally broke free, the one she had refused to let fall in front of the pack now streaming freely down her face as she lay there, alone and broken, wondering if this was truly how her story would end. As her vision blurred and darkness crept along the edges of her sight, Elena noticed something strange. A faint light seemed to be glowing somewhere ahead of her, pulsing gently like a heartbeat through the trees. She blinked, certain her exhausted mind was playing tricks on her, but the light remained steady, drawing her attention even as consciousness began to slip away. With the last of her strength, she crawled toward the glow, dragging herself across roots and fallen branches, until the trees finally opened into a small clearing she had never seen before. Ancient stone structures rose from the earth, covered in moss and vines that had clearly grown undisturbed for centuries. The light seemed to be coming from somewhere deep within the ruins, calling to her in a way she could not explain. Elena's vision blurred further as her body finally reached its limit. The last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her completely was the outline of a massive stone structure ahead, something that looked almost like the remains of a great hall, silent and waiting, as though it had been standing there for 1,000 years, simply for this moment. In the fading edges of her awareness, she thought she heard something stir beneath the earth, a low sound like distant thunder rolling across a sky she could no longer see. It might have been her own heartbeat, thundering one final time before consciousness slipped away entirely. It might have been something else, something ancient finally sensing the presence it had waited centuries to discover. Elena had no strength left to wonder which explanation was true. Her fingers curled weakly against the cold stone beneath her, the last conscious motion her body would make for some time. A single drop of blood from a cut along her palm traced a slow path across the ancient floor, disappearing into a crack that seemed to swallow it eagerly, as though the stone itself had been thirsting for exactly this offering. Then everything went black, and Elena Voss, rejected daughter of a fallen bloodline, fell into the kind of sleep from which some never wake. When Elena finally opened her eyes again, she was no longer lying on the cold forest floor. She found herself inside a vast chamber built from ancient gray stone, the ceiling stretching so high above her that it disappeared into shifting shadows. Thin beams of pale light filtered through cracks overhead, illuminating dust that floated lazily through the still air. Her body ached in places she had never noticed before, but the sharp, gnawing hunger and exhaustion that had consumed her in the forest seemed strangely distant now, as though something had settled the worst of it while she slept. She pushed herself up slowly, her palms pressing against smooth stone that felt oddly warm despite the chill hanging in the air. Looking around, she realized she was resting near the base of a massive throne, cracked down the middle and half swallowed by roots that had grown through the floor over countless years. Faded carvings lined the walls, depicting figures in crowns and armor. Battles fought long before any pack territory had ever been claimed by wolves. "You are awake," a voice said, deep and resonant, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Elena scrambled backward, her back pressing against the cold stone of the shattered throne as her eyes darted around the chamber, searching for the source of the voice. Shadows along the walls began to shift, thickening and pulling together as though gathering themselves into something solid. She watched, frozen between fear and disbelief, as one shadow separated from the darkness entirely, and stepped forward, taking the shape of a tall figure wrapped in tattered robes, a crown of twisted metal resting upon a head that seemed more mist than flesh. "Please," Elena whispered, pressing herself further against the throne. "I don't want any trouble. I was just looking for shelter." The figure tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Shelter," he repeated softly, almost amused. "You stumbled into a place that has waited 1,000 years for someone like you, and you call it shelter." More shadows began to shift around the chamber, each one slowly forming into similar figures, some wearing crowns, others carrying ceremonial swords or staffs topped with strange symbols. Elena counted as many as she could before losing track entirely, the sheer number of spectral figures overwhelming her senses. They filled the chamber from wall to wall, silent and watchful, their attention fixed entirely on her. Some of the figures wore armor scorched and cracked as though frozen forever in the final moments of some devastating battle. Others appeared in flowing ceremonial robes, their expressions serene despite the strange, misty quality of their forms. A few carried scars visible even through their ghostly translucence, reminders of violent ends that had claimed them long before Elena's grandmother's grandmother had ever been born. Despite their vastly different appearances, every single spirit shared one thing in common: an unwavering intensity of focus directed entirely toward the frightened woman kneeling at the center of their ancient hall. A quiet murmur passed among them, voices overlapping like wind moving through dry leaves, though Elena could not make out individual words within the collective sound. Some of the spirits shifted closer, curiosity evident in their expressions, while others remained near the shadowed edges of the chamber, watching with expressions she could not quite read, caution mixed with something that might have been hope long buried beneath centuries of waiting. Elena's eyes swept across the chamber again, taking in details she had missed during her first frightened glance. Broken pillars rose along the edges of the hall, each one carved with images of battles and coronations, scenes of armies bowing before rulers whose faces had long since eroded away. A wide staircase, cracked and overgrown with pale roots, climbed toward a raised platform where the shattered throne rested, its surface catching the strange, shifting light that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere within the ancient stone. She noticed, too, that the cold she had felt while lying in the forest had faded entirely, replaced by a strange, dry warmth that seemed to radiate from the very stones beneath her. Her clothes, torn and stained from her journey through the woods, remained unchanged, yet she felt none of the exhaustion that should have accompanied a night spent collapsing at the edge of death. Something in this place had steadied her, though she could not begin to understand how or why. "Who are you?" Elena managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The tall figure who had spoken first stepped closer, his form solidifying slightly with each passing moment, until Elena could make out sharp features carved from what seemed like both stone and smoke. "I am Malachar," he said, "once king of an empire whose name has long since faded from memory. And these," he gestured to the countless figures surrounding them, "are the kings and rulers who came before and after me, bound together in death as we were divided in life." Elena's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She had grown up hearing tales of spirits and ancient curses, stories meant to frighten children into staying within pack boundaries, but she had never truly believed such things could exist outside of bedtime warnings. Yet here she was, surrounded by proof that the stories had never been simple fiction at all. "Why am I here?" she asked. "Why did you bring me to this place?" Malachar's expression shifted, something that might have been sorrow crossing his ghostly features. "We did not bring you here, child. Your own blood called to this place." The moment it touched these stones, something that has slept for 1,000 years began to stir. Elena looked down at her hands, noticing for the first time faint scratches along her palms, the kind that might have come from crawling across rough stone in her final moments of consciousness before collapsing. She remembered the pain, remembered pressing her hands against the ground as she dragged herself toward the light, but she had not realized her blood had spilled onto the ancient floor. "How long have you all been trapped here?" Elena asked, glancing around at the countless silent figures surrounding her. 1,000 years is such a long time to wait in darkness. Have none of you ever tried to leave this place? "We cannot leave," Malachar answered simply. "Our forms are bound to these ruins, tethered to the very stones that once served as our final refuge. We exist here between memory and true death, neither fully gone nor fully present within the living world. Only a bond with a living vessel could ever grant us the ability to act beyond these walls again." "That sounds like a lonely existence," Elena said quietly, surprising herself with the genuine sympathy creeping into her voice, despite her own fear and confusion. "It is," Malachar admitted, something like old sorrow flickering across his shifting features. "Which is precisely why your arrival tonight means more to us than you can yet understand." "I don't understand," she said. "My blood is nothing special. I come from a broken family. I was rejected tonight because my bloodline is considered weak." A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the gathered spirits, low and unsettling, echoing off the stone walls in a way that made Elena's skin crawl. Malachar raised a hand, silencing the murmurs instantly, before turning his attention back to her. "Weak," he repeated, the word dripping with quiet disdain. "Is that truly what they told you, that the blood running through your veins is weak?" Elena nodded, uncertain where this conversation was leading, uncertain whether she should be afraid or curious about what these ancient figures seemed to know that she did not. "Then they lied to you," Malachar said simply. "Or perhaps they never knew the truth themselves. Your bloodline is not weak, child. It is buried, hidden, suppressed by choices made generations before you were born. Choices meant to protect you from a world that feared what your ancestors once were." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She thought of her parents, quiet and withdrawn, always avoiding questions about their family history, always changing the subject whenever anyone asked about the fall from status that had haunted their name for generations. She had always assumed it was simple shame, an old disgrace no one wanted to discuss. She had never imagined there might be something deeper hidden beneath the silence. "What do you mean hidden?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "Hidden from what?" Malachar studied her for a long moment before answering, his expression grave. "From themselves, most of all. Your family carries the last remnants of a bloodline older than any wolf pack claiming territory in these lands. A bloodline that once ruled before packs, before borders, before the world divided itself into the small pieces it clings to now." The other spirits began to murmur again, their voices overlapping in a low hum that filled the chamber with an eerie kind of music. Elena felt overwhelmed, her mind struggling to process everything unfolding around her. Just hours ago, she had been standing in front of her entire pack, humiliated and cast aside. Now she was being told that the very blood they had rejected her for might be far more significant than anyone in Blackthorn had ever imagined. "Tell me about your empire," Elena said suddenly, surprising herself with the question. "If it was truly as vast as you claim, why has no wolf, no elder, no story ever mentioned it? Surely something so significant would have left some trace behind." Malachar's expression grew distant, his ghostly features shifting as though recalling memories long buried beneath centuries of dust. "Traces remain, child, though few living creatures know how to recognize them. The ruins you now stand within are but a fragment of what once existed here. Entire cities stood where forests now grow wild and untamed. Rivers were diverted to serve our capitals. Mountains were carved with roads connecting territories that stretched further than any modern pack could imagine claiming." "Then why has it all disappeared?" Elena pressed. "Empires do not simply vanish without leaving something behind for later generations to discover." "They vanish," Malachar said quietly, "when those who fear them work tirelessly to erase every memory of their existence. The alliance that destroyed us did not simply defeat our armies. They burned our libraries, toppled our monuments, and hunted down anyone who might have carried forward the truth of what we once were. Only these ruins remained, hidden deep within woods that grew wild and dangerous enough to discourage curious wanderers for 1,000 years. I still don't understand why any of this matters," she said. "Even if what you're saying is true, what does it change? I've already been rejected. I've already lost everything." "You have lost a pack that never truly understood your worth," Malachar corrected gently. "But you have not lost yourself, Elena. If anything, tonight marks the moment you finally begin to find the parts of yourself that were hidden away before you were even born." He gestured toward the ancient carvings lining the chamber walls, images of rulers standing among their people rather than above them, offering counsel and protection rather than simply commanding obedience through fear. "Our empire was not without flaws," he admitted. "We made mistakes, as any great civilization does, but we understood something your modern pack has forgotten entirely. that true strength exists to protect the vulnerable, not to determine who deserves protection based on the accident of their birth. Elena studied the carvings carefully, feeling a strange resonance with the values Malachar described, values that stood in stark contrast to the cold judgment she had witnessed from Blackthorn's council only hours earlier. "If that is truly what your empire represented," she said slowly, "then perhaps I understand a little better why my ancestors chose to preserve this bloodline no matter the cost, even generations after the empire itself had fallen." "Precisely," Malachar said, something like satisfaction crossing his ghostly features. "Which is why the choice before you tonight carries such significance, Elena. Not simply the reclamation of power, but the potential restoration of something far more valuable, a way of leading that honors both strength and compassion in equal measure." Malachar's expression softened slightly, though the intensity in his gaze never wavered. "It changes everything, child, because tonight, for the first time in 1,000 years, your blood touched this throne, and the moment it did, we awakened." Elena felt a chill race down her spine as the weight of his words settled over her. She looked around at the countless spirits filling the chamber, their eyes all fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously powerful and terribly small. Whatever this place was, whatever these spirits truly represented, she understood one thing clearly. Her life had changed the moment she stepped through the boundary of Blackthorn territory, and there was no simple path back to the world she had left behind. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, forcing herself to meet Malachar's gaze directly despite the fear still coursing through her. He studied her for a long moment before answering, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that seemed to settle into the very stones around them. "We want what was always meant to happen, child. We want you to remember who you truly are." She looked down at her scratched palms again, turning them over slowly beneath the pale light drifting through the chamber. It seemed impossible that something as simple as a few drops of blood could summon 1,000 ancient spirits from centuries of silence. Yet the proof surrounded her on every side, patient and unblinking, waiting for her to decide what came next. She thought of her mother's quiet evasions, her father's careful silences, and wondered how much of their fear had been rooted in exactly this moment, a moment they must have always known might one day arrive. "I need time," she finally said, her voice steadier than she expected. "This is too much to accept in a single breath. I do not even know if I can trust what you are telling me." Malachar inclined his head slightly, something that might have been respect flickering across his shifting features. "Time is something we have in abundance, child, though your body will require rest and nourishment sooner than you might realize. Sleep now if you can. When you wake, we will speak further of what your blood truly means, and what choice lies before you." One of the younger spirits, a woman wearing a simple crown far less ornate than those worn by the kings surrounding her, stepped forward hesitantly before Elena could settle back against the throne. "Forgive my boldness," she said, her voice softer than the others who had spoken thus far. "But I wished only to say that whatever you decide, child, know that your survival tonight was no small thing. Many who wandered into these woods before you never found their way to this chamber at all. Something guided you here, whether fate, blood, or simple chance. That alone speaks to a strength worth honoring." Elena studied the young spirit carefully, grateful for the unexpected gentleness in her words amid the overwhelming weight of everything else she had learned tonight. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will remember that." Elena hesitated, glancing around at the silent, watchful spirits surrounding her, before finally allowing her exhausted body to settle back against the base of the broken throne. Despite everything strange and impossible about this chamber, she felt no immediate danger from these ancient figures, only a patient, waiting stillness that seemed to stretch back centuries. As her eyes grew heavy once more, she wondered whether she was dreaming this entire encounter, or whether her life had truly changed forever, the moment her blood touched this forgotten stone. The chamber fell into silence, the countless spirits watching and waiting, as Elena Voss knelt at the base of a shattered throne, beginning to understand that her rejection had not ended her story at all. It had simply opened the door to something far larger than she had ever imagined possible. The silence in the chamber stretched long enough that Elena could hear her own heartbeat echoing off the ancient stone walls. She studied the countless spectral figures surrounding her, searching their expressions for any hint of deception, any sign that this was some cruel trick meant to torment a wolf already broken by rejection. But she found nothing except patient, unwavering attention, as though every spirit in the room had been waiting centuries for this exact moment to arrive. "You said my bloodline was hidden," she finally said, breaking the silence. "Hidden by whom? And why would anyone hide something like this instead of simply telling me the truth?" Malachar lowered himself onto the edge of the broken throne, his form flickering slightly as he settled, like smoke caught in a breeze. "Fear," he said simply. Fear has always been the reason powerful things are hidden, buried, or forgotten entirely. Your ancestors were not always weak, Elena. Once, they ruled over lands so vast that entire kingdoms bowed before them without question. Then what happened? She asked. If my bloodline was truly so powerful, why did it fall so completely that my own family has spent generations in shame? One of the other spirits stepped forward, an older figure wearing armor etched with symbols Elena did not recognize. His voice when he spoke was rougher than Malakar's, carrying the weight of old battles and older regrets. Power invites enemies, he said. Your bloodline was hunted, child. Entire wars were fought to destroy what your ancestors represented. In the end, survival meant hiding, not fighting. Your family chose to bury their power so deeply that even they forgot it existed, hoping that silence would protect the generations to come. Elena absorbed this information slowly, pieces of her family's strange behavior finally beginning to make sense. The way her parents flinched whenever certain old stories were mentioned. The way they discouraged her from asking questions about ancestors buried generations back. She had always assumed it was simple embarrassment. Now she understood it might have been something closer to fear, passed down through bloodlines, inherited without explanation, protecting a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. She remembered one evening in particular, when she was perhaps 8 years old, finding an old, tarnished ring hidden inside a small wooden box beneath her mother's bed. The ring had been engraved with symbols she did not recognize, strange and beautiful, unlike anything worn by other wolves within Blackthorn. When she had shown it to her mother, expecting praise for her discovery, her mother's face had drained of color entirely, and she had snatched the ring away with a sharpness Elena had never experienced from her before or since. "Where did you find this?" her mother had demanded, her voice trembling with something Elena had assumed at the time was simple anger. "You must never speak of this to anyone, do you understand me? Never." Elena had never seen that ring again after that day, and her mother had never explained why such a simple object had provoked such an intense reaction. Standing now within the ancient ruins, surrounded by spirits claiming descent from an empire lost to history, she finally understood that the symbols engraved upon that ring had likely belonged to the very bloodline these ancient kings now spoke of so reverently. "But if it was hidden so well," she said, "why is it awakening now? Why me? Why tonight?" Edward stepped closer, his weathered features grim, as he considered how best to explain the timing of her awakening. "The seal placed upon your bloodline was crafted by the last true sovereign before her death, a woman named Coraline, who understood that her line could not survive open persecution. She wove her magic carefully, ensuring the power would remain dormant until 3 conditions were met. The bloodline had to survive intact through many generations. The heir had to reach adulthood without ever fully embracing the power. And finally, that heir had to suffer a rejection so profound, it would shatter whatever remained of the original binding. Elena felt a chill move through her as she absorbed this explanation. "So my suffering was not simply an unfortunate coincidence," she said slowly. "It was the final requirement needed to unlock everything you are telling me." "In a manner of speaking," Malakar admitted, "though do not mistake this for meaning your pain was somehow orchestrated or destined by cruel design. Coraline could not have known precisely how or when such a rejection might occur. She simply understood that only genuine anguish, the kind that breaks something fundamental within a person, could crack a seal woven with such desperate strength." "Rejection," Elena whispered, understanding dawning slowly. "Being cast out, losing everything I thought defined me." "Precisely," Malakar said. "Pain of that magnitude cracks even the deepest of seals. Your Alpha, without ever realizing it, did exactly what generations of enemies could never accomplish. He broke the chains holding your true nature in place." Elena felt a strange mixture of anger and disbelief settle over her. Damon's rejection, the very act that had shattered her entire world only hours ago, had somehow triggered the awakening of something far greater than either of them could have imagined. She almost laughed at the cruel irony of it all. The Alpha who called her weak, unknowingly responsible for unleashing whatever power now stirred within her veins. "Show me," she said suddenly, surprising even herself with the steadiness in her voice. "If this is truly who I am, show me the truth. I need to understand what's happening to me before I can decide what to do next." Malakar exchanged a glance with the older armored spirit before nodding slowly. "Very well. But understand, child, once you see the truth of your bloodline, there is no returning to the life you once knew. The girl who was rejected tonight will not be the same one who walks out of these ruins." Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself against the fear still trembling beneath her ribs. She thought of Damon's cold expression, the council's swift judgment, the pity in Grace's eyes as guards held her back. She thought of every moment she had spent believing she was simply not enough, simply too weak, simply born into the wrong family. If there was truth buried beneath all of that pain, she needed to know it. "Show me," she repeated, firmer this time. Malachar raised a hand, and the chamber around them seemed to shift, stone walls fading into something resembling mist. Images began forming within the fog, faint at first, then sharpening into scenes Elena somehow understood were memories, though not her own. She saw figures standing atop mountain peaks, commanding storms with nothing more than a raised hand. She saw armies kneeling before rulers whose eyes glowed with the same faint light she had seen pulsing through the ruins upon her arrival. She saw wars fought not with claws and teeth, but with power drawn from somewhere deep within the earth itself. "These are the sovereigns," Malachar explained as the images continued shifting around them. "Rulers who existed before the first wolf pack ever claimed territory, before borders divided this land into fragments fighting endlessly over scraps of power. Your bloodline descends directly from the last true sovereign line, a line thought completely extinguished centuries ago." The mist shifted again, revealing a scene of a great hall filled with celebration. Wolves and humans alike gathered beneath banners bearing the same symbols Elena had once glimpsed on her mother's hidden ring. Musicians played instruments unlike anything she recognized, and children ran laughing between long tables laden with food, entirely unaware of the darkness that would eventually descend upon their world. She felt an unexpected ache watching this vision, mourning a piece she had never known yet somehow understood belonged to her lineage. Another image followed close behind, darker this time, showing the same hall consumed by flames, figures fleeing through smoke-filled corridors as invaders poured through broken gates. Elena flinched at the sight, her chest tightening with an emotion that felt strangely personal despite the centuries separating her from this moment. She watched a woman, regal even amid the chaos, gather several children close, before disappearing through a hidden passage, her expression fierce with determination, to protect what remained of her bloodline, no matter the cost. Elena watched the images with a mixture of awe and disbelief, struggling to reconcile the powerful figures before her with the quiet, withdrawn family she had grown up with. "If my ancestors were truly this powerful," she said, "how did an entire bloodline simply disappear? Surely something so significant would have left more traces than a single hidden family." The armored spirit spoke again, his voice heavy with old grief. "Many died protecting the secret. Others scattered across the land, changing names, abandoning titles, doing whatever was necessary to ensure the bloodline survived, even if its power remained dormant. Your family was among the last, choosing isolation and shame over the danger that came with power fully awakened." "What was his name?" Elena asked quietly, gesturing toward the armored spirit who had spoken. "If I am to trust any of this, I would like to know who I am speaking with." The spirit straightened slightly, offering her a small, respectful bow. "I was called Edward in the final years of the old empire," he said. "A general who served the sovereign line faithfully until the very end. I fell defending the last stronghold when the alliance of frightened kingdoms finally overwhelmed us. I do not regret that death, child. I regret only that it took 1,000 years for someone of your blood to return and give that sacrifice meaning." Elena studied him carefully, trying to reconcile the weight of his words with the strange calm settling over her despite the impossible circumstances surrounding this conversation. "And the others?" she asked, gesturing to the countless spirits filling the chamber. "Are they all soldiers and kings from your empire?" "Some," Malachar answered. "Others come from ages both before and after my own reign. Rulers and warriors bound together by a curse none of us fully chose, yet none of us have found the strength to break alone. We are fragments of many centuries, gathered here by a fate none of us fully understand, waiting for exactly this moment." Elena felt the weight of their collective attention pressing against her. 1,000 pairs of eyes, some curious, some hopeful, some still guarded with old suspicion, all fixed upon the woman who might finally offer them the purpose they had waited so long to reclaim. The mist around them slowly began to clear, the images fading as the ancient chamber solidified once more around Elena. She felt different somehow, as though witnessing those memories had shifted something deep within her, a lock quietly turning open after generations of remaining sealed shut. Her hands, when she looked down at them, seemed to carry a faint shimmer beneath the skin, something that had not been there before tonight. "What happens now?" she asked, looking up at Malachar and the countless spirits surrounding them. "If my bloodline is truly awakening, what does that mean for me?" Malachar rose from his place at the edge of the throne, his form growing slightly more solid as he moved closer to her. "It means you have a choice to make, child. The power within you is only beginning to stir. Left alone, it will continue awakening slowly over time, perhaps taking years before reaching its full potential. But there is another path, one that could grant you strength far beyond anything your bloodline could achieve on its own. What path? Elena asked, though something in his tone told her she already suspected the answer. A bond, Malachar said simply. Between you and the 1,000 kings gathered within these walls, we have waited centuries for a sovereign heir to awaken our purpose once more. If you accept us, we could offer you power capable of reshaping everything you thought impossible only hours ago. Elena looked around at the countless spirits watching her, waiting patiently for her answer, their expressions unreadable yet somehow expectant. She thought of Damon's cruel words, the council's swift condemnation, the life she had lost within a single devastating night. She thought of every moment she had been made to feel small, unworthy, insignificant, simply because of a bloodline she had never fully understood until now. Tell me everything, she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her chest. Before I decide anything, I need to understand exactly what this bond would mean, and exactly what it would cost me. Malachar's expression shifted into something resembling approval, as though her caution pleased him more than blind acceptance ever could have. Wise words, child. Very well, let us begin. And as the countless spirits settled around her, patient and ancient, Elena Voss prepared to learn the full truth of the bargain that would change the course of her entire existence. Malachar began speaking slowly, choosing each word with the careful precision of someone who understood the weight his explanation carried. The bond we offer is not simple, he said. It is not a gift given freely, nor a burden placed upon you without consequence. It is a joining of spirit and blood, a merging of your living essence with the will of 1,000 kings who ruled long before you were born. The chamber had grown quieter since Elena's arrival, the earlier murmuring among the gathered spirits settling into an attentive stillness that made the weight of this conversation feel even heavier than before. Elena could sense, somehow, that every spirit present understood exactly how significant this moment truly was, centuries of patient waiting hanging upon whatever answer she ultimately chose to give. Elena listened carefully, forcing herself to remain calm, despite the enormity of what she was hearing. What would happen to me if I accepted this bond? She asked. Would I still be myself, or would I simply become a vessel for all of you? You would remain yourself, Malachar assured her, though something in his tone suggested the truth was more complicated than a simple answer could capture. But you would also become something more. Our will would strengthen your own, our knowledge would become accessible to you, and our strength would flow through your body whenever you called upon it. In exchange, you would become our voice in the living world, carrying our purpose forward into an age that has long forgotten we ever existed. And what purpose is that? Elena asked, narrowing her eyes slightly. What exactly do 1,000 dead kings want from someone like me? The older armored spirit stepped forward again, his expression grave. Justice, he said simply. Our empire did not fall because we were weak, child. It fell because we were betrayed, hunted, and destroyed by forces who feared what we represented. We have waited centuries, bound to this place, unable to move forward until a sovereign heir emerged capable of finishing what was left unfinished. Elena felt a chill settle over her, though she could not decide if it stemmed from fear or something closer to determination. She thought of the pacts that had ruled over these lands for generations, unaware that an empire far older and more powerful had once stood in their place. She thought of Damon, standing in judgment over her only hours earlier, never imagining that the woman he rejected carried blood capable of shaking the very foundations of everything he believed unshakable. If I accept this bond, she said slowly, what would it require of me? You said it comes with a cost. I need to know exactly what that cost is before I agree to anything. Malachar's expression grew somber. The ritual itself is not without pain. Binding 1,000 souls to a single living body is not something achieved gently. You will feel every one of us settle within you, and though the process will not claim your life, it will not be without suffering. Beyond the ritual itself, you must understand that once bound, our purpose becomes intertwined with your own. We will not force your hand in matters that do not concern us, but where our empire's legacy is threatened, our voices will grow loud within your mind, urging you toward action. What happens to the 1,000 voices once bound? Elena asked, needing to understand every detail before committing to something so permanent. Would I hear you constantly? Would there ever be silence again? Malachar considered the question carefully. We would not overwhelm your mind with constant noise, child. Think of it instead as a deep well you may draw from when needed. Most days our presence will feel like little more than quiet instinct, a steadiness beneath your own thoughts. Only in moments of great consequence will our voices grow louder, urging guidance you may choose to accept or resist as you see fit. And what would you consider a moment of great consequence? Elena pressed further. I would rather understand the boundaries of this bond clearly now than discover them unexpectedly later. Matters touching the safety of the innocent, Malachar answered. Threats to the bloodline itself. Decisions that echo far beyond a single lifetime. In such moments, expect our counsel to grow insistent, though never overwhelming enough to silence your own judgment entirely. We learned long ago that a ruler who cannot think for herself makes a poor vessel for any legacy worth preserving. And if I resist? Elena pressed. If there comes a day when what you want and what I want no longer align, what happens then? The older armored spirit, Edward, answered this time. Then you will discover the true nature of this bond, child. We do not seek a puppet. A vessel without will of its own would serve our purpose poorly. We seek a sovereign capable of leading with wisdom, not simply repeating our ambitions. Should your judgment differ from ours, the choice remains yours to make. We can advise, we cannot command. The ritual itself is not something we created lightly, Malachar continued. It was Coraline herself who designed the binding, understanding that her descendants would need allies capable of restoring what enemies had stolen. She could not save her own empire, but she could ensure that whoever eventually broke the seal would never stand alone against whatever challenges awaited them. Elena absorbed this information slowly, feeling a strange kinship with this ancestor she had never known existed until tonight. What happened to her? She asked quietly. This Coraline, did she survive long enough to see any of her plans take root? Malachar's expression grew somber. She did not. She fell defending the last stronghold alongside myself and many others gathered within this chamber. But her final act, weaving this binding into the very stones of our resting place, ensured that her sacrifice would not be entirely in vain. You are the fulfillment of a promise she made to herself in her final hours, Elena. You are proof that hope, however deeply buried, does not simply disappear. Elena considered his words carefully, weighing the uncertainty of this ancient bargain against the life she had already lost. She had nothing left in Blackthorn, no home to return to, no pack willing to accept her, no mate who wanted her by his side. Whatever power lay dormant within her bloodline, whatever strength these ancient kings could offer, it seemed a far better path forward than wandering the forbidden woods alone until exhaustion, or worse, claimed her entirely. Will I still look like myself? Elena asked, glancing down at her own hands, suddenly aware of how much she still did not understand about the physical toll this bargain might demand. Will my family, if I ever see them again, still recognize the woman standing before them? You will remain Elena Voss, Malachar assured her. Your appearance may shift subtly, your eyes carrying traces of the power now settled within you, but you will not become some unrecognizable creature wearing your face. The bond changes what you carry within, not who you fundamentally are. Edward stepped forward once more, his weathered expression softening slightly as he addressed her directly. Understand also, child, that this bond cannot easily be undone once accepted. Should you wish to walk away from this power in years to come, the binding will not simply release you. We would become as much a part of you as your own beating heart, for better or for worse. Elena absorbed this warning carefully, understanding the permanence of what was being offered with a clarity that made her stomach tighten with fresh uncertainty. And if I refuse? She asked, testing the boundaries of this decision before committing to anything. What happens to me then? Then you leave this place as you are, Malachar said. Your bloodline will continue awakening slowly, without our guidance or strength to shape it. You would face whatever challenges lie ahead relying only on the power your ancestors left buried within your blood, unassisted and alone. Elena closed her eyes for a long moment, picturing every path available to her. She could walk away from this ancient chamber, continue deeper into the forbidden woods, and hope her newly awakening bloodline would somehow protect her from the dangers surely waiting beyond these ruins. Or she could accept an offer from 1,000 ancient kings, binding her fate to theirs, gaining strength beyond anything she had ever imagined possible, but forever changed by the choice. She thought too of Grace, the one friend who had tried to reach her even as guards held her back, the one voice that had spoken against the council's cruelty even when doing so carried risk. Whatever path she chose within these ruins, she hoped it might one day allow her to return and repay that loyalty, to show Grace that her faith had not been misplaced. She thought of her parents, quiet and burdened by secrets they had carried alone for so many years, wondering if reclaiming this bloodline might finally offer them some measure of peace after generations of hidden fear. She thought of Damon's cold rejection, the council's swift cruelty, the life stolen from her within the span of a single night. She thought of every moment she had spent believing herself weak, unworthy, insignificant. If this bond could grant her the strength to reclaim everything taken from her, to prove every single person who had ever doubted her utterly wrong, then perhaps the cost, whatever pain it required, was one worth paying. "I accept," she said finally, her voice steady and certain despite the fear still coiled tightly within her chest. A murmur passed through the gathered spirits, something resembling both relief and anticipation rippling across their ghostly forms. Malikar studied her for a long moment, as though searching for any hint of doubt hidden beneath her resolve, before nodding slowly. "Then let us begin," he said. "There is no turning back once the ritual starts, Elena Voss. Are you certain this is the path you wish to walk?" "I am certain," she replied. Malikar raised both hands, and the countless spirits surrounding them began moving closer, forming a wide circle around Elena as she stood at the center of the ancient chamber. The air grew thick with energy, a pressure building against her skin that made every hair on her body stand on end. She felt her heartbeat quicken, adrenaline surging through her veins as instinct screamed at her to run, yet she forced herself to remain still, trusting the decision she had already made. "Kneel," Malikar instructed gently. Elena lowered herself to the stone floor, her palms pressing flat against the cold ground exactly where her blood had spilled hours earlier. The moment her skin touched the ancient stone, a surge of energy shot through her entire body, stealing the breath from her lungs. She gasped, her back arching as light began pouring from beneath her palms, spreading outward in intricate patterns that covered the entire chamber floor within seconds. The countless spirits began chanting in a language Elena did not recognize, their voices merging into a single resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. She felt something begin to shift deep within her, an unlocking sensation spreading from her chest outward, as though a door long sealed shut was finally creaking open after centuries of stillness. Pain followed almost immediately, sharp and overwhelming, forcing a cry from her throat that echoed off the ancient stone walls. The pain came in waves, each one crashing against her senses harder than the last, like an ocean tide determined to reshape the very shoreline of her being. She felt fragments of memory that were not hers pouring into her mind, flashes of coronations and battles, quiet council chambers and desperate final stands against overwhelming enemies. Her own thoughts seemed to scatter beneath the flood, momentarily lost within centuries of accumulated experience now settling into the space her own mind had always occupied alone. She wanted to scream, wanted to beg for the process to stop, but some deeper instinct told her that surrender now would leave her trapped halfway between two states, neither fully herself nor fully bonded to the ancient kings surrounding her. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to endure, focusing on Malikar's steady voice cutting through the chaos like a single point of light guiding her through a storm. "Stay with us." Malikar's voice cut through the pain, steady and commanding. "Do not fight what is happening. Let it in." She could hear Edward's voice joining Malikar's, and beneath both of them, a chorus of 1,000 other voices, some speaking in languages she did not recognize, others simply humming wordless encouragement that seemed to wrap around her like a physical embrace. She realized, somewhere in the depths of her pain, that these ancient kings were not simply observing her suffering. They were carrying her through it, lending their own considerable will to help her endure what her body alone might never have survived. Elena forced herself to relax despite every instinct urging her to resist, allowing the overwhelming sensation to wash over her completely. Images flashed behind her closed eyes, memories that did not belong to her. Battles fought centuries ago, kingdoms risen and fallen, faces of rulers she had never met yet somehow recognized on some deep, instinctual level. The pain intensified for a moment that felt like an eternity, before finally beginning to fade, replaced by something entirely different. Warmth spread through her veins, ancient and powerful, settling into every corner of her being like water, filling a long empty vessel. She felt strength she had never known unfurling within her muscles, awareness expanding beyond anything she had previously understood as her own senses. When she finally opened her eyes, the chamber around her looked different somehow, sharper, clearer, every detail visible with a clarity she had never possessed before. The countless spirits watching her seemed almost to glow more brightly now, their forms somehow more solid, more present than they had been even moments earlier, as though her acceptance of the bond had strengthened not only her own being but theirs as well. Malikar's expression, when she finally focused on him, carried something she had not seen from him before, a quiet vindication, as though centuries of patient waiting had finally found their purpose fulfilled. She looked down at her hands, watching as a faint golden light shimmered beneath her skin, before slowly fading from view. Rising to her feet, she felt different in ways she could not fully articulate, stronger, steadier, more certain of herself than she had ever been in her entire life. The countless spirits surrounding her bowed low, their forms flickering with something resembling reverence. She flexed her fingers slowly, marveling at the way her body responded with a fluid precision that had never existed before tonight. Her hearing had sharpened, to the point where she could detect the faint drip of water somewhere deep within the ruins, a sound that must have been echoing for centuries yet had gone entirely unnoticed by anyone until now. Her sense of smell carried layers of information she had never before perceived: the mineral scent of old stone, the faint trace of moss clinging to broken pillars, even the lingering memory of dust disturbed by her own footsteps. More than the physical changes, she felt something settle deep within her chest, a quiet steadiness that had never existed within her before, not even in her happiest childhood memories. The uncertainty and self-doubt that had followed her throughout her entire life, whispers that she was somehow lesser, unworthy, insufficient, had not vanished entirely, but they no longer controlled her the way they once had. In their place stood something new, a calm confidence rooted in truths only she now understood. "It is done," Malachar said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction Elena had not heard from him before. "You are no longer simply Elena Voss, rejected daughter of a fallen bloodline. You are the vessel of 1,000 kings, bearer of the sovereign line reawakened after 1,000 years of silence." She walked slowly around the chamber, trailing her fingers along the ancient carvings lining the walls, feeling a strange sense of recognition settle over her, as her fingertips traced symbols she somehow now understood despite never having studied them before. Names and titles long forgotten by the living world surfaced within her mind unbidden. Fragments of knowledge passed to her through the binding ritual, gifts from the 1,000 kings now residing quietly within her spirit. Edward approached her carefully, his weathered expression softening as he studied the transformation that had taken hold of her. "You carry yourself differently already," he observed. "There is a steadiness in you now that was not present when you first stumbled into this chamber, exhausted and broken." "I do not feel entirely like myself," Elena admitted, flexing her fingers slowly as she continued adjusting to the strange new sensations flooding her body. "Yet somehow, this also feels like the truest version of myself I have ever known." Malachar nodded approvingly at this observation. "That is precisely how it should feel, child. We have not replaced who you are. We have simply revealed what was always waiting beneath the surface, suppressed by generations of fear and careful hiding." Elena stood tall amid the ancient ruins, feeling the weight of 1,000 souls settled quietly within her, their strength now hers to command. She thought of Damon, of the council, of every wolf who had ever looked down upon her for a bloodline they never truly understood. Whatever challenges awaited her beyond these ruins, she would face them not as the broken girl who had stumbled into the forbidden woods, but as something far greater entirely. "Show me the way back to Blackthorn," she said, her voice carrying new authority that echoed off the ancient stone walls. It is time they understood exactly what their rejection has awakened. Elena stepped through the tree line at the edge of Blackthorn territory, just as the sun began climbing over the horizon, casting long golden light across the familiar fields she had once called home. She paused at the boundary markers, feeling the strange absence of the invisible barrier that had once separated Packlands from the outside world. It no longer recognized her as an outsider. If anything, the very air itself seemed to bend slightly around her presence, acknowledging something new and unfamiliar walking within its reach. She remembered standing at this exact spot only 2 days earlier, tears streaming down her face as she forced herself to walk away from everything she had ever known. The memory felt distant now, as though it belonged to someone else entirely, a frightened young woman whose entire identity had been built upon the approval of others. Elena understood, standing here now, that she would never again allow her sense of worth to depend so completely on whether a pack chose to accept her. She moved forward with steady, deliberate steps, her senses sharper than she had ever known them to be. Every sound carried greater clarity, every scent held more meaning, every subtle shift in the wind told her stories the old Elena would never have noticed. She could sense the pack members going about their morning routines long before she reached the village center, their heartbeats steady and unaware of the change approaching their borders. She passed the small cottage where she had grown up, noticing with quiet ache that new curtains hung in the windows, evidence that another family had already claimed the space her parents had abandoned when they left Blackthorn shortly after her banishment, unable to bear the shame the council had heaped upon their name. She wondered where they had gone, whether they had heard yet of what had become of their daughter, whether they would recognize her if she ever found them again. The first wolf to notice her was a young guard named Owen, stationed near the outer fields. He glanced up casually, expecting nothing more than a routine morning, but the moment his eyes met hers, his entire body went rigid. His nostrils flared, confusion crossing his features as he tried to process a scent that felt both familiar and entirely foreign at once. Elena? He said hesitantly, uncertainty thick in his voice. Is that really you? She offered him a calm, measured nod, watching as something instinctual within him urged his body to lower slightly, an unconscious response to a presence his wolf recognized as significant, even if his mind could not yet explain why. Owen straightened quickly, clearly startled by his own reaction, but said nothing further as she continued walking past him toward the village center. Word spread quickly through Blackthorn, wolves emerging from homes and gathering spaces to witness her return. Whispers followed her every step, some filled with confusion, others with open suspicion, but Elena noticed something new, woven through the murmurs as well. Something resembling uncertainty, bordering on unconscious deference. She had left this village as a rejected, broken woman cast into darkness. She returned as something the pack instinctively understood it did not fully comprehend. An elderly wolf named Martha, who had lived near the edge of the village for as long as Elena could remember, paused in the doorway of her small home, one hand pressed against her chest as she watched Elena pass. I have not felt a presence like this since I was a child, she murmured to a neighbor standing beside her. My grandmother used to speak of old powers buried beneath these woods. I always thought them simply stories meant to frighten young pups into obedience. A group of younger wolves gathered near the well, whispering excitedly among themselves as Elena passed, their curiosity clearly overriding whatever caution their elders had instilled in them. One young girl, no older than 10, tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked in a voice not nearly quiet enough, "Is she a queen now? She looks like the queen from the old stories you tell me before bed." Her mother shushed her quickly, though Elena caught the exchange easily with her heightened hearing, allowing herself the faintest hint of a smile despite the gravity of the moment. Whatever else had changed within her during her transformation, she still found comfort in small, simple moments of humanity, reminders that despite everything, she remained connected to the world she had once called home. Grace was the first to reach her, pushing through the gathering crowd with tears already streaming down her face. "You're alive," she breathed, pulling Elena into a tight embrace before pulling back to study her more closely. "But something is different. Elena, what happened to you out there?" "A great deal," Elena said simply, offering her friend a small, reassuring smile despite the gravity of everything that had changed within her. "I will explain everything soon, Grace, but first, there are matters I must address." She continued walking toward the central gathering space, the very place where she had been rejected only a day earlier. The crowd parted instinctively as she approached, their reactions ranging from wide-eyed shock to whispered fear, none of them quite able to articulate exactly what had changed about the woman who had stumbled into the forbidden woods believing she would never return. A pair of elderly wolves near the edge of the gathering space exchanged worried glances, one leaning close to whisper something Elena's heightened senses caught easily despite the distance. "The old stories," the woman murmured to her companion. "The ones about the buried kingdom beneath the forbidden lands. I always thought my grandfather was simply telling tales to frighten children away from wandering too far. Perhaps he knew something the rest of us dismissed too quickly." Her companion nodded slowly, his expression troubled. "If those stories carry any truth, then this pack has stumbled into something far larger than a simple matter of rejected bonds and wounded pride." Damon felt her presence before he saw her. He had been standing near the council hall discussing matters of pack security with Nathan and several other senior members when a sudden, overwhelming awareness rippled through his entire body, his wolf stirring with an intensity he had not felt in years. His hands had gone still against the table where a map of pack borders lay spread before him, his conversation with Nathan trailing off mid-sentence as something ancient and undeniable pulled at his attention. "Alpha?" Nathan had asked, noticing the sudden change in his posture. "Is something wrong?" Damon had not answered immediately, his senses straining toward the source of the disturbance rippling through his chest. Guilt had gnawed at him constantly since the previous night's ceremony, a quiet, persistent ache he had told himself would fade with time, yet the feeling now surging through him bore no resemblance to simple guilt. It felt like recognition, like a missing piece of himself suddenly returning after being torn away. He turned sharply, his heart pounding in his chest for reasons he could not immediately explain, and there she was, standing at the edge of the gathering crowd, watching him with calm, unwavering eyes. "Elena," he breathed, the name escaping his lips before he could stop it. His wolf howled within him, a desperate, aching sound, unlike anything he had experienced before, recognition crashing through his system with a force that nearly buckled his knees. He had rejected the bond only a day ago, believing he had severed whatever connection fate had intended between them. Yet standing before her now, he understood with painful clarity that the bond had never truly broken. If anything, it burned brighter than ever, amplified by whatever transformation had occurred within her during her time away. "You look surprised to see me," Elena said, her voice steady and calm despite the chaos she could sense building within him. "Did you truly believe the Forbidden Woods would simply claim me, Alpha Ashgrove?" The formal address struck him harder than any insult could have. Gone was the desperate pleading from the night before, replaced by cool composure that unsettled him far more than open anger ever could have. He struggled to find words, his mind racing to reconcile the broken woman he had cast out, with the composed, powerful presence standing before him now. "Elena, he started, but she raised a hand, silencing him with an ease that surprised even herself. "I did not return to hear apologies," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent gathering. "I returned because this pack, and its council, need to understand something important. You called my bloodline weak. You called me unworthy. I want you to look at me now, Alpha Ashgrove, and tell me if you still believe those words to be true." Nathan stepped forward, clearly attempting to regain control of a situation rapidly slipping beyond the council's understanding. "Elena Voss, you were formally rejected and cast out of this pack. Your presence here violates the decision made by this council." Elena turned her attention toward him slowly, and something in her gaze made even the seasoned council member take an involuntary step backward. "Careful, Nathan," she said, her voice deceptively gentle. "I am no longer the woman your council so easily discarded. I would advise choosing your next words with far greater consideration." A murmur rippled through the crowd, wolves exchanging uncertain glances as they processed the shift in power dynamics unfolding before them. Damon watched Elena carefully, searching for any sign of the woman he had known, yet finding only fragments buried beneath something far more formidable. His wolf continued straining against him, desperate to close the distance between them, but he forced himself to remain still, uncertain of what exactly stood before him now. Claire, the young woman the council had chosen as Damon's intended betrothed following Elena's rejection, stood near the edge of the crowd, her expression caught between confusion and growing alarm as she watched the exchange unfold. She had known, of course, that Damon's wolf had reacted strangely since Elena's departure, restless and distracted in ways he tried carefully to hide, but she had never imagined the depth of the connection now visibly straining between them in front of the entire pack. "Alpha Ashgrove," Claire said carefully, stepping forward despite the tension thick in the air. Perhaps this conversation would be better held privately, away from so many eyes. Damon barely glanced in her direction, his attention entirely consumed by the woman standing before him, radiating power he still struggled to comprehend. "Not now, Claire," he said, his voice distracted. "This matter must be addressed here, in front of everyone who witnessed what happened 2 nights ago." Claire's expression flickered with hurt, though she said nothing further, stepping back into the crowd with quiet dignity, despite the obvious sting of being so easily dismissed. Elena noticed the exchange but said nothing, understanding that whatever complications existed between Damon and his intended betrothed were not currently her concern to address. "What happened to you?" he finally asked, his voice quieter than before, stripped of the authority he usually carried so easily. "Elena, please, tell me what happened in those woods." She studied him for a long moment before answering, weighing how much truth this moment truly required. "I discovered who I truly am," she said finally, "something your council's judgment could never have predicted, and something you will come to understand in time." She turned slightly, addressing the gathered crowd rather than simply Damon and the council alone. "I am not here to seek revenge for what happened last night," she continued, though something in her tone suggested this statement carried more nuance than its simple wording implied. "I am here because the truth deserves to be known. This pack built its judgment upon assumptions about my bloodline that were entirely and completely mistaken." Victor, one of the eldest council members, stepped forward cautiously, his expression a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "What truth do you speak of, Elena? Explain yourself clearly, or leave these lands as the council already decided." Elena allowed herself a small, measured smile, the first genuine hint of the woman she once was flickering briefly across her expression, before disappearing beneath renewed composure. "Very well," she said. "Let me show you exactly what your council so carelessly rejected." She raised her hand slowly, and though she did not fully unleash the power now settled within her, a faint golden shimmer traced along her skin, visible enough for the entire crowd to witness. Gasps spread through the gathering, wolves stumbling backward as instinct recognized something ancient and powerful stirring before them, something none of them could fully comprehend or name. A young mother standing near the front of the crowd pulled her child protectively closer, though her expression carried more awe than fear. An elderly council member Elena did not recognize sank slowly to one knee, an instinctive gesture he seemed unable to fully explain even to himself, drawing startled glances from those standing near him. Whatever ancient recognition lived within wolf instinct, it seemed to be responding to Elena's presence in ways that bypassed conscious thought entirely. Damon stared at her, his chest tightening with an emotion he could not immediately identify, something caught between awe and dawning horror at the realization of exactly what his rejection had set into motion. Whatever Elena Voss had become during her time in the Forbidden Woods, it was clear to every wolf present that Blackthorn's council had made a mistake far more significant than any of them could have imagined only a day earlier. Sophie, a young wolf who had trained alongside Elena years earlier, before her family's disgrace had made such friendships increasingly rare, pushed forward through the crowd with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Elena," she breathed, staring at the fading golden light along her friend's skin. "We thought you were gone forever. We thought the woods had taken you." "The woods gave me something instead of taking anything," Elena replied gently, offering the younger wolf a reassuring smile despite the tension still thick in the air around them. "Though I understand this is a great deal to comprehend all at once. This is only the beginning," Elena said quietly, her golden light fading back beneath her skin as she lowered her hand. "The council rejected me believing I was insignificant. I have returned to ensure that mistake is never repeated again." The gathered crowd remained frozen in stunned silence, the golden light that had traced along Elena's skin lingering in their collective memory long after it faded from view. Damon stood motionless, his mind struggling to reconcile everything he thought he understood about pack hierarchy, about power, about the woman he had so carelessly cast aside only a day earlier. His wolf continued straining beneath his skin, desperate and aching, recognizing something in Elena that his rational mind could not yet fully accept. "This is impossible," Nathan finally said, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the gathering space. "No wolf bloodline carries power like this. Whatever trick you are performing, Elena Voss, it will not save you from the consequences of defying this council's decision." Elena turned toward him slowly, her expression calm despite the tension crackling through the air around her. "You still do not understand," she said. "This is not a trick, Nathan. This is simply the truth your council never bothered to investigate before casting judgment upon my family's name." Victor stepped forward again, his weathered features creased with genuine concern rather than the dismissive arrogance Nathan seemed determined to maintain. "If what you claim is true," he said carefully, "then this council owes you an explanation for actions taken without proper understanding. But we require proof beyond a simple display of light, Elena. Power alone does not undo the reasoning behind decisions already made." "Fair enough," Elena replied, appreciating the older wolf's willingness to at least consider possibilities beyond his initial assumptions. "Then let me offer you something more substantial than mere light." Grant, standing near the edge of the council gathering, folded his arms with obvious skepticism, though his expression suggested genuine curiosity beneath his guarded posture. He had known Elena's family for many years, having once served alongside her grandfather before the fall from grace that had marked her bloodline as unworthy of trust or respect. Whatever he was about to witness, he intended to judge it with the fairness he felt her grandfather had always deserved, regardless of what the rest of the council believed. She closed her eyes briefly, reaching inward toward the presence she now carried within her. The countless voices of ancient kings settled quietly beneath her conscious thoughts, patient and watchful. She sensed Malakar's presence stir gently in response to her silent request, offering guidance rather than taking control, exactly as promised during the binding ritual completed only hours earlier. When she opened her eyes again, they had shifted, the familiar brown replaced by something closer to burnished gold, glowing faintly even in the bright morning light. The crowd gasped collectively, several wolves stumbling backward, their instincts screaming warnings their rational minds could not fully articulate. Even Nathan took an involuntary step back, his earlier confidence visibly shaken by what he was witnessing. "My bloodline descends from the sovereign line," Elena announced, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to resonate beyond simple volume, settling into the very bones of everyone present. "An empire that ruled these lands long before wolf packs ever existed, hunted nearly to extinction by those who feared what my ancestors represented. My family did not fall due to weakness, Nathan. We fell because we chose survival over power, hiding our true nature to protect future generations from the very fear you displayed toward me only a day ago." Silence stretched through the gathering as wolves absorbed this revelation, uncertain how to reconcile ancient history with the woman standing before them, radiating power none of them had ever witnessed within Packlands before. Grace watched from the edge of the crowd, her expression a complicated mixture of pride, fear, and lingering confusion about exactly how much her closest friend had changed during her brief absence. Damon finally found his voice, though it emerged rougher than he intended, strained beneath the weight of guilt now settling heavily upon his shoulders. "Elena, if this is true, If you truly carry power like this within your blood, then I made a terrible mistake rejecting you. My wolf recognized something in you from the very beginning. I ignored that recognition because of pressure from voices I should never have listened to over my own instincts. Elena studied him for a long moment, watching the genuine anguish crossing his features, yet feeling strangely distant from the emotional pull that once would have overwhelmed her completely. Whatever bond still existed between them, it no longer held the same desperate power it once carried before her transformation within the ancient ruins. "Perhaps you did," she said carefully, refusing to offer him easy forgiveness despite the clear regret written across his expression. "But mistakes carry consequences, Damon. You rejected me in front of this entire pack, humiliated me publicly, then cast me into a forest most wolves never survive. Whatever guilt you feel now does not simply erase what happened." Nathan, sensing an opportunity to regain some measure of control over a rapidly destabilizing situation, stepped forward once more. "Regardless of your bloodline's history," he said, his voice regaining some of its earlier authority, "you were formally rejected under proper pack procedure. This council's decision remains valid unless overturned through appropriate channels." Elena turned her attention toward him, something sharper flickering behind her golden eyes. "Proper procedure," she repeated, her tone carrying quiet disdain. "Tell me, Nathan, was it proper procedure that led you to whisper into Damon's ear before the ceremony even began? I noticed you that night, urging him toward a decision clearly made before I ever stepped into that circle." A ripple of surprise passed through the gathered crowd, wolves exchanging uncertain glances as they processed this new information. Damon's head snapped toward Nathan, his expression darkening rapidly as understanding dawned across his features. "Is this true?" Damon demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Did you manipulate my decision that night, Nathan?" Nathan's composure faltered slightly, though he quickly attempted to regain his footing. "I merely advised you based on concerns held by several council members regarding Elena's family history. The decision was ultimately yours to make, Alpha." "Advised," Elena repeated, her voice carrying quiet disdain. "Is that truly the word you would use? I watched you whispering urgently into his ear only moments before the ceremony began, Nathan. That does not resemble simple advice given with an open mind. That resembles a decision already made, waiting only for the right moment to be spoken aloud." Victor, standing nearby with growing discomfort visible across his features, finally spoke up. "Nathan approached several of us in the days before the ceremony," he admitted reluctantly. "He expressed concern about the Voss bloodline's history and suggested the Alpha might require gentle reminders of those concerns should the bond prove genuine. I did not think much of it at the time. I assumed it was simple caution, nothing more." Damon's jaw tightened as the full picture assembled itself before him, understanding now that his rejection had not been entirely his own decision, but one carefully shaped by a council member, determined to prevent an outcome he found politically inconvenient. "You manipulated the most significant decision of my life, Nathan, and in doing so, you nearly cost an innocent woman everything. A decision heavily influenced by information, deliberately shaped to guide me toward rejection," Damon said, his voice growing colder with each passing word. "You knew how the council felt about her bloodline before the ceremony even began, and you ensured I felt the same pressure rather than allowing me to trust my own instincts." Elena watched this unfolding tension with careful interest, recognizing an opportunity forming within the fractures now appearing between Damon and his council. She had not returned to Blackthorn seeking simple reconciliation or revenge. She had returned to ensure the truth was known, to reclaim the dignity stolen from her, and to establish herself as something far beyond what this pack had ever imagined possible from someone they once considered insignificant. "This conversation is far from finished," she said, addressing both Damon and the assembled council members with equal measures of authority. "But understand this clearly. I did not return to beg for reinstatement into a pack that discarded me so easily. I returned because the truth of my bloodline deserves recognition, and because those who acted with such careless cruelty deserve to understand exactly what they have awakened." She turned slowly, addressing the entire gathered crowd rather than simply the council alone. "Whatever happens next between myself and this pack," she continued, "know that I am no longer the woman you cast into darkness believing her insignificant. I carry the strength of 1,000 ancient kings within me now, and I will not allow this council's careless judgment to go unanswered." With that, she turned and walked away from the gathering, leaving stunned silence in her wake. Damon watched her retreating figure, torn between the guilt weighing heavily upon his conscience, and the growing realization that whatever path lay ahead for Elena Voss, it would likely reshape everything Blackthorn Pack believed unshakable about power, bloodline, and the true cost of judgment rendered without proper understanding. He remained standing in the gathering space long after the crowd had dispersed, his mind replaying every moment since the moon ceremony, searching for the exact point where he might have chosen differently. He thought of the warmth he had felt the instant his eyes first met Elena's across the clearing, a warmth he had buried beneath Nathan's careful words and his own misguided fear of appearing weak before his counsel. He wondered now whether true strength might have looked entirely different that night, whether trusting his own instincts rather than the counsel of frightened men might have spared them both this painful, uncertain path they now found themselves walking. Later that afternoon, Elena found Grace waiting for her near the edge of the village, concern etched clearly across her friend's features. "You handled that beautifully," Grace said, though worry still colored her voice. "But Elena, did you see the way Nathan looked at you before he retreated with the other council members? That was not the expression of a man who intends to simply accept defeat quietly." "I saw it," Elena confirmed, her own expression growing thoughtful as she considered the implications of what she had witnessed. "Fear makes wolves like Nathan dangerous, Grace. I do not believe this conflict has ended simply because I revealed the truth of my bloodline today." "Then what will you do?" Grace asked. "You cannot simply wait for whatever he might attempt next." Elena considered the question carefully, feeling the quiet counsel of the ancient kings stirring gently within her thoughts. "For now, I will remain vigilant," she said finally. "I did not return to Blackthorn seeking further conflict, Grace, but I will not allow myself to be caught unprepared again either." Behind him, Nathan exchanged worried glances with several other council members, already beginning to whisper among themselves about how to address a threat none of them had ever anticipated facing. Whatever plans they began forming in that moment, none of them yet understood the full extent of what Elena Voss had truly become during her brief exile within the Forbidden Woods. Night settled over Blackthorn territory, thick clouds obscuring the moon that had witnessed Elena's humiliation only 2 nights earlier. Inside the council hall, Nathan paced back and forth across the stone floor, his expression tight with barely restrained anxiety. Victor sat quietly at the long table, watching his fellow council member with growing concern, while several other senior members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "She cannot be allowed to gain further influence within this pack," Nathan said, his voice low and urgent. "Whatever power she displayed today, it threatens everything this council has built. If word spreads that a rejected wolf now holds strength greater than our alpha, we risk complete collapse of pack hierarchy." Victor frowned deeply, clearly troubled by the direction this conversation was heading. "What exactly are you suggesting, Nathan? Elena has done nothing threatening since her return. She spoke truth about her bloodline and left peacefully. There is no justification for further action against her." "There is every justification," Nathan snapped, his composure finally cracking under the weight of his own fear. "She humiliated this council in front of the entire pack. She revealed information that undermines our authority. If we allow her to walk freely, believing herself untouchable, we invite chaos into lands we have worked generations to stabilize." A younger council member named Derek, who had remained silent throughout most of the discussion, finally spoke up cautiously. "Perhaps we should simply monitor her actions rather than risk provoking someone who clearly possesses power beyond anything we fully understand." Nathan turned toward him sharply, his eyes narrowing with something bordering on desperation. "Monitoring is not enough. We need to eliminate this threat before it grows beyond our ability to control it entirely." Silence fell over the room, the weight of his suggestion settling heavily upon everyone present. Victor rose slowly from his seat, his expression hardening with clear disapproval. "You speak of eliminating a wolf who has done nothing but reveal truths this council should have investigated before rendering judgment. This path you propose leads only toward disaster, Nathan." "Disaster already surrounds us," Nathan shot back, slamming his palm against the wooden table. "Every wolf in this pack witnessed her power today. How long before they begin questioning why an alpha and council they trust have failed to address someone capable of shattering our entire hierarchy with nothing more than a raised hand? We are the ones responsible for maintaining order here, Victor, and order requires that threats be addressed before they metastasize beyond our control." Another council member, an older wolf named Grant who had remained silent throughout most of the discussion, finally cleared his throat. "There is also the matter of the alpha himself," he said carefully. His wolf recognized her the moment she returned. "Should that bond strengthen further, should he choose to reverse his rejection, we would find ourselves with a Luna possessing power greater than any alpha this pack has ever known. That alone should give this council pause." "And what would you have us do about that, Grant?" Victor asked sharply, clearly growing frustrated with the direction this discussion continued taking. "Forbid our own alpha from following his instincts because we fear the consequences of true happiness finding him? That path leads to exactly the kind of overreach that caused this crisis in the first place." Grant shifted uncomfortably under Victor's pointed gaze. I only mean to say that we must consider every angle before deciding how to proceed. This is not a simple matter of one wolf returning with unexpected strength. It touches the very foundation of how this pack understands power and succession. Nathan seized upon this point eagerly. Exactly my concern. Whether she intends harm or not, her mere existence threatens the balance of authority within Blackthorn. We cannot simply wait to discover her true intentions once it becomes too late to act. Victor shook his head slowly, though the doubt in his own voice had begun to waver despite his continued objections. Even if everything you say carries merit, Nathan, the solution you propose crosses a line this council has never crossed before. We do not eliminate pack members based on fear of what they might become. Disaster is exactly what awaits us if we do nothing, Nathan countered, his voice rising with barely contained panic. You saw her eyes today, Victor. You felt the power radiating from her presence. If she chooses to turn that power against this pack, none of us will survive to regret our inaction. Derek exchanged uncertain glances with several other council members, clearly torn between loyalty to established authority and growing discomfort with the direction Nathan was pushing this discussion. Despite lingering doubts, the fear Nathan had planted continued spreading through the room, each council member slowly succumbing to the same desperate logic driving his increasingly reckless suggestions. Victor made one final attempt to steer the conversation away from the path Nathan seemed determined to follow. Even if we accept your reasoning, Nathan, surely there are alternatives beyond violence. We could propose a formal agreement, boundaries and terms, that allow Elena's presence within these lands, while limiting her influence over pack governance. Why must our first response be one of elimination? Because negotiation assumes good faith on both sides, Nathan replied coldly, and I have no confidence that a woman carrying the power of 1,000 ancient kings intends to negotiate anything with a council that rejected her only days ago. We strike first, Victor, or we risk everything this pack has built over generations. By the time the meeting concluded hours later, a plan had been formed, one that several council members would later claim they never fully agreed to, yet none had found the courage to openly oppose. Miles, a skilled tracker known for handling delicate matters requiring discretion, was summoned quietly and given instructions that would set devastating events into motion before the night's end. Elena, unaware of the plans forming against her, spent the evening at Grace's small home near the edge of the village, finally allowing herself a moment of quiet reflection after the overwhelming events of the past 2 days. Grace watched her friend carefully, noticing subtle changes beyond the obvious shift in her eyes, a stillness and confidence that had never existed within Elena before her exile into the Forbidden Woods. They had shared a simple meal together, the first proper food Elena had eaten since her return, and for a brief while, the conversation had drifted toward lighter memories, shared laughter from their childhood training days, gentle teasing about mistakes made during their younger years chasing after approval from pack elders who rarely noticed either of them. It felt, for those brief moments, almost like nothing had changed at all, as though Elena might simply be the same young woman who had once dreamed alongside her closest friend, about a future neither of them could have predicted. Do you regret it? Grace asked quietly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. The bond you formed with those spirits? Sometimes I look at you and barely recognize the woman who left here just 2 days ago. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. I do not regret it, she said finally. But I would be lying if I claimed everything about this transformation feels comfortable. There is a weight now, Grace. Voices settled within me that were not there before. Ancient purposes. I must somehow reconcile with my own desires. And what do you desire? Grace asked gently. Beyond reclaiming what was taken from you, what does Elena Voss truly want moving forward? Before Elena could answer, a subtle shift in the air outside caught her attention, something her heightened senses recognized immediately as dangerous. She rose quickly from her seat, her golden eyes narrowing as she moved toward the window, scanning the darkness beyond with newfound clarity. Elena, what is it? Grace asked, alarm creeping into her voice as she watched her friend's sudden tension. Someone is approaching, Elena said quietly, and they do not carry peaceful intentions. She moved swiftly toward the door, gesturing for Grace to remain inside as she stepped out into the cool night air. The village around her seemed unnaturally quiet, most wolves already settled into their homes for the evening, leaving the narrow pathways between buildings shrouded in shadow and silence. Elena extended her senses outward, feeling for the presence she had detected only moments earlier, and found it lurking just beyond the tree line at the edge of the village. Miles moved through the shadows with practiced precision, his years of experience handling difficult tasks evident in every careful, measured step. He had been given clear instructions: eliminate the threat before it could grow further, ensure the pack's stability remained undisturbed, and leave no trace connecting the council to whatever happened tonight. He had accepted assignments like this before, though rarely against a target whose true nature remained so completely unknown. He caught sight of Elena standing near Grace's home, illuminated faintly by the dim light spilling from a nearby window. She stood perfectly still, her posture relaxed despite the tension he could sense radiating from her position. For a brief moment, doubt flickered through his mind, an instinctual warning that something about this assignment felt fundamentally different from anything he had encountered before. He thought of the payment Nathan had promised, enough silver to finally leave behind the dangerous work that had defined most of his adult life, enough to settle somewhere quiet where his particular skills would never again be required. He thought, too, of the brief description Nathan had provided regarding his target, a rejected wolf, weak and broken, easily dealt with before she could cause further trouble for the pack's stability. Nothing in that description had prepared him for the eerie calm now radiating from the woman standing motionless in the darkness ahead. He pushed the doubt aside, reminding himself of the payment promised for completing this task successfully, and moved forward with renewed determination. Elena, sensing his approach long before he fully emerged from the shadows, turned slowly to face the darkness with calm, measured composure. "You may as well step forward," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the still night air. "I have known you were there since before you crossed the tree line." Miles froze momentarily, startled by her immediate awareness of his presence, before forcing himself to continue his approach. He emerged from the shadows fully, his expression carefully neutral despite the surprise clearly registering behind his eyes. "You should not be here," Elena said quietly, her golden eyes studying him with an intensity that made him distinctly uncomfortable. "Whoever sent you has made a grave miscalculation regarding exactly what they are dealing with." "I have my orders," Miles replied, his voice steady despite the growing unease settling within his chest. "And I intend to complete them." Elena studied him for a long moment, feeling the presence of the ancient kings stir within her, their voices whispering warnings and guidance simultaneously through her consciousness. She understood clearly now that whatever plans Nathan and the council had formed following her return, they had chosen a path leading directly toward confrontation neither side could easily walk away from unchanged. "Then let us see," she said quietly, exactly what those orders were truly worth. The confrontation began without warning, Miles lunging forward with a speed that would have overwhelmed most wolves within Blackthorn territory. Elena moved instinctively, her body responding with reflexes far beyond anything she had possessed before her transformation, sidestepping his initial attack with a fluid grace that surprised even herself. She felt the presence of the ancient king settle more firmly within her consciousness, guiding her movements without fully controlling them, a partnership rather than possession. Miles recovered quickly, spinning to face her again, his expression tightening with growing concern, as he registered exactly how effortlessly she had avoided his attack. He had faced many opponents throughout his years handling difficult assignments, but something about the wolf standing before him felt fundamentally different, wrong in ways his experience had never prepared him to encounter. He circled her carefully, studying her posture for any sign of weakness he might exploit, though he found none. Sweat had begun beading along his brow despite the cold night air, his breathing growing slightly ragged as adrenaline surged through his system. He had entered this confrontation expecting a straightforward task, a rejected wolf weakened by exile and hardship, easy prey for someone of his considerable experience. What stood before him now bore no resemblance to that expectation. He attempted a feint, dodging low before springing upward toward her exposed side, hoping to catch her off guard with the sudden change in trajectory. Elena anticipated the movement before he even completed it, pivoting smoothly to intercept his strike with an ease that made him question everything he thought he understood about combat and strength. She did not retaliate with force, simply redirecting his momentum harmlessly past her, allowing him to stumble forward into empty space where his target had been only a heartbeat earlier. "You should reconsider this path," Elena said calmly, her voice carrying steady authority despite the tension of the moment. "I have no desire to cause you harm, but I will defend myself if necessary." "I cannot simply walk away," Miles replied, though uncertainty had begun creeping into his voice. "The council has made their decision clear." He lunged forward again, this time aiming a strike meant to incapacitate rather than kill, following instructions meant to neutralize rather than eliminate entirely, at least until he could better understand exactly what he was dealing with. Elena caught his wrist mid-strike with a speed that startled him completely, her grip firm despite appearing almost gentle, holding him in place with strength that felt entirely disproportionate to her frame. "I told you," she said quietly, her golden eyes locking with his own. "This path leads only toward regret." She released his wrist, stepping back to create distance between them, rather than pressing whatever advantage she clearly possessed. Miles stumbled backward, rubbing his wrist while staring at her with dawning understanding that whatever payment had been promised for this task, it was clearly insufficient compensation for the danger he now recognized standing before him. Miles attempted one final approach, circling wide to try flanking her from an angle he hoped might catch her guard down, but Elena turned smoothly to face him regardless of his position, her golden eyes tracking his every movement with an ease that finally broke through whatever remaining confidence he had carried into this confrontation. He stopped mid-stride, his shoulders sagging slightly as the futility of continuing became undeniably clear even to someone as stubborn and experienced as himself. Grace watched from the doorway of her home, her heart pounding as she witnessed the confrontation unfolding just beyond her threshold. She wanted desperately to intervene, but understood clearly that her presence would only complicate a situation Elena seemed entirely capable of managing on her own. "Who sent you?" Elena asked, her tone shifting from defensive caution toward something more probing. "I already suspect the answer, but I want to hear it confirmed directly." Miles hesitated, weighing loyalty against the growing realization that continuing this confrontation offered no clear path toward success. Finally, he straightened slightly, his expression settling into something resembling reluctant honesty. "Nathan," he said, "along with several other council members who fear what your presence means for pack stability." Elena nodded slowly, unsurprised by this confirmation, yet still feeling a flicker of genuine disappointment settle within her chest. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that her return might inspire curiosity, or at least cautious respect rather than immediate hostility. Instead, fear had driven the council toward exactly the kind of desperate action she had hoped to avoid triggering. "Return to them," she said finally, her voice carrying quiet resolve. "Tell them exactly what happened here tonight. Tell them that whatever fear drives their decisions, violence will not solve the problem they believe I represent." Miles studied her carefully, clearly surprised by the mercy being offered, despite his failed attempt against her. "Why let me go?" he asked cautiously. "You could easily have ended this confrontation far more decisively." "Because I am not interested in becoming the monster this council already fears me to be," Elena replied simply. "But make no mistake, if further attempts are made against me, my patience will not extend indefinitely." Miles lingered a moment longer, studying her with an expression that had shifted from wary calculation into something closer to grudging respect. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I do not believe you deserved what happened to you 2 nights ago. Whatever the council fears about your power, I saw nothing tonight that suggests you intend to misuse it." Elena inclined her head slightly, accepting this small, unexpected acknowledgement. "Then perhaps you might consider finding work that does not require you to threaten the lives of innocent wolves in the future," she said, not unkindly. "You seem capable of better judgment than the task you were given tonight suggests." Miles nodded slowly, retreating back into the shadows from which he had emerged, leaving Elena standing alone once more in the quiet darkness surrounding Grace's home. She released a long breath, feeling the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly beginning to fade, as the ancient presence within her settled back into quiet watchfulness. Grace emerged fully from the doorway, rushing toward her friend with obvious relief and lingering fear. "Elena, are you all right? What just happened?" "The council sent someone to eliminate me," Elena said quietly, her expression carefully composed despite the weight of this realization settling heavily upon her. "Nathan's fear has apparently grown beyond simple political maneuvering." Before Grace could respond, another presence made itself known nearby, footsteps approaching quickly from the direction of the village center. Elena turned, her senses immediately identifying the newcomer even before he fully came into view. Damon emerged from the darkness, his expression a mixture of alarm and barely contained fury. "Elena," he said breathlessly, clearly having sensed something significant through whatever remained of their bond. "I felt something. A disturbance. Are you hurt?" "I am unharmed," Elena replied, watching him carefully as he approached. "Though I suspect you already know exactly why that might not have been the case." Damon's expression darkened further as understanding settled fully across his features. "Nathan," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "He sent someone against you, didn't he?" "He did," Elena confirmed, "though I suspect he was not acting entirely alone in this decision." Damon closed his eyes briefly, clearly wrestling with the implications of council members within his own pack, acting against a fellow wolf without his knowledge or approval. When he opened them again, something had hardened within his expression, resolve replacing the earlier guilt that had colored his interactions with her throughout the day. "This ends now," he said firmly. "Whatever authority Nathan believes he holds within this council, he does not have permission to act against pack members through assassination attempts. I will address this immediately. He turned to address the full council, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Effective immediately, any decision involving action against a pack member, whether current or formerly bonded, must pass through my direct approval. What happened last night represents a fundamental breach of trust this council was never granted the authority to commit. I will not allow fear to justify such reckless disregard for the values this pack claims to protect. Elena studied him carefully, noting the genuine anger driving his words, yet remaining cautious about fully trusting this sudden shift toward protective determination. "And what of your own role in everything that has happened?" she asked. "Your rejection set this entire chain of events into motion, Damon. Anger at Nathan does not erase your own responsibility in what unfolded." Damon's expression flickered with renewed guilt, though he held her gaze steadily despite the discomfort clearly written across his features. "You are right," he admitted. "I made a terrible mistake rejecting you, influenced by fears and pressures I should never have allowed to override my own instincts. I cannot undo that decision, Elena, but I can ensure the council answers for attempting to silence you through violence." Elena considered his words carefully, feeling the weight of the ancient kings stirring within her, their collective wisdom offering quiet counsel through instinct rather than direct instruction. Whatever path lay ahead for herself and Damon, whatever reckoning awaited the council for their desperate actions, she understood clearly that tonight marked a turning point neither Blackthorn Pack nor her own transformed existence could easily retreat from. "Then let us address this properly," she said finally. "Together, if that is truly what you intend." Damon nodded firmly, and together they turned toward the village center, prepared to confront a council whose fear had driven them toward actions that would reshape the very foundation of Blackthorn's future. As they walked side by side through the quiet, snow-dusted paths connecting Grace's home to the council hall, neither spoke for a long while, each lost in their own thoughts about the confrontation waiting ahead. Elena found herself studying Damon's profile in the pale morning light, searching for some hint of the wolf who had rejected her so cruelly only days earlier, yet finding instead someone who seemed genuinely determined to make amends, however incomplete that effort might ultimately prove to be. "Whatever happens today," Damon said quietly, breaking the silence between them, "know that I intend to see this pack held to a higher standard than what nearly happened to you last night. That standard begins with holding myself accountable first." Elena said nothing in response, though something in her expression softened slightly, a small crack forming in the careful composure she had maintained since her return to Blackthorn. Dawn broke slowly over Blackthorn territory as Elena and Damon made their way toward the council hall, the events of the previous night still weighing heavily upon both of them. Word had already begun spreading through the village about the attempted attack, wolves gathering in small groups to whisper about what such an act meant for pack stability and leadership moving forward. Nathan stood inside the council hall when they arrived, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious tension radiating from his posture. Victor and Derek sat nearby, along with several other senior members who had participated in the previous night's fateful discussion. The moment Damon entered, his expression made clear that this confrontation would not follow whatever script Nathan had prepared in anticipation of this meeting. "You sent someone to kill her," Damon said without preamble, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for deflection or evasion. "You acted against a member of this pack without my knowledge or approval, Nathan. Explain yourself immediately." Nathan's composure faltered slightly, though he attempted to maintain his footing despite the clear disadvantage of this confrontation. "I acted in the best interests of pack stability," he said, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried during the previous night's planning session. "Elena Voss represents a threat this council could not simply ignore." "A threat," Elena repeated quietly, stepping forward to stand beside Damon. "I returned to this pack seeking only acknowledgement of truth, Nathan. I made no threats against anyone within these lands. Yet you responded by sending someone to end my life in the darkness of night." Victor rose slowly from his seat, his expression heavy with obvious regret. "This was never meant to happen," he said, addressing both Elena and Damon directly. "I voiced concerns about this path last night, but ultimately failed to prevent it from moving forward. I take responsibility for that failure." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "I have served this council for many years, through the reign of the previous Alpha and now through yours, Damon. In all that time, I have never witnessed a decision made with such reckless disregard for the values this pack claims to uphold. I should have done more to stop Nathan the moment he first suggested such a path. That failure sits heavily on my conscience, and I intend to see it corrected, whatever form that correction must take." Nathan shot Victor a sharp glance, clearly displeased by this unexpected admission, but Victor held his ground, refusing to back down from the truth despite the discomfort it clearly caused his fellow council member. Derek nodded slowly beside him, offering quiet confirmation of Victor's account. "The council will answer for this decision," Damon said firmly, his gaze fixed directly upon Nathan. "Attempted violence against a pack member, regardless of circumstances surrounding her return, cannot be tolerated within Blackthorn territory. Nathan, you are hereby removed from your position on this council, effective immediately." Nathan's expression cracked, disbelief and anger warring across his features as the weight of this decision settled fully upon him. "You cannot simply remove me because a rejected wolf returned claiming power none of us can verify," he protested, though his voice carried far less conviction than his words suggested. Derek, who had listened to the entire exchange with growing discomfort, finally spoke up from where he sat near the edge of the table. "I was present the night this plan was discussed," he said quietly, addressing Damon directly despite the obvious tension his admission would cause. "I voiced doubt at the time, but I did not do enough to stop it from moving forward. I share responsibility for what nearly happened, and I will accept whatever consequence this council determines appropriate." Damon studied Derek carefully, noting the sincerity behind his admission. "Your honesty is noted," he said finally. "Unlike Nathan, you have shown willingness to acknowledge fault rather than justify it. I will consider the appropriate response to your involvement separately, once calmer heads can properly review everything that transpired that night." Grace, who had followed Damon and Elena to the hall despite the tension surrounding the confrontation, stood quietly near the entrance, watching the exchange with a mixture of relief and lingering worry. She had feared for her closest friend's safety since the moment Elena had sensed Miles approaching in the darkness, and seeing the council finally forced to answer for their reckless decision brought her a measure of comfort she had not expected to feel so soon. "I can verify it," Damon replied coldly. "I felt it myself, as did every wolf present during her return. Your fear drove you toward a decision that nearly resulted in murder within these lands, Nathan. This council cannot function with members willing to act so recklessly against those they perceive as threats." The remaining council members exchanged uncertain glances, clearly processing the rapid shift in power dynamics unfolding before them. Nathan, recognizing the futility of further protest, straightened his posture with whatever dignity remained available to him, and departed the hall without another word, leaving behind a silence heavy with unspoken implications for what came next. Outside the council hall, word of Nathan's removal spread quickly through the village, wolves gathering in small clusters to discuss the shocking turn of events. Some expressed quiet relief, having long harbored private doubts about Nathan's increasingly rigid influence over council decisions. Others voiced concern about the stability of leadership during such an uncertain time, wondering aloud what further changes Elena's presence might bring to the careful balance their pack had maintained for generations. Martha, the elderly wolf who had watched Elena's return with such quiet astonishment days earlier, found herself surrounded by curious neighbors eager to hear her thoughts on the matter. "I always sensed something troubling in how quickly that council moved to cast her out," she said, shaking her head slowly. "Justice delayed is still justice, I suppose, though I wish it had not required such a dangerous night to arrive at the truth." Elena watched this exchange carefully, feeling a complicated mixture of vindication and lingering unease settle within her chest. Whatever satisfaction came from watching Nathan face consequences for his actions, she understood clearly that this confrontation represented only the beginning of a much larger reckoning still unfolding around her transformed existence. Once the immediate tension had settled somewhat, Damon turned toward her, his expression softening into something more vulnerable than the authority he had displayed only moments earlier. "Elena," he said quietly, "I understand that removing Nathan does not undo the pain caused by my own rejection. I have thought carefully about everything that has happened, and I need to say something important." Elena studied him carefully, uncertain what direction this conversation might take, though something in his tone suggested significant vulnerability beneath his usual composed authority. "Speak freely," she said. "Whatever you wish to say, I am prepared to hear it." Damon took a steadying breath before continuing. "I allowed fear and pressure from others to override instincts I should have trusted completely. My wolf recognized you from the very first moment, Elena, yet I dismissed that recognition because of doubts planted by those more concerned with political maneuvering than genuine leadership. I was wrong, completely and inexcusably wrong, and I understand that no simple apology can fully address the harm caused by that decision." She noticed, too, that he had not mentioned Claire once during this entire conversation, and she wondered briefly what had become of the betrothal the council had so quickly arranged following her rejection. She chose not to ask, uncertain whether the answer would complicate feelings she was still struggling to sort through amid everything else demanding her attention. Elena remained quiet for a long moment, allowing his words to settle fully before responding. She thought of the humiliation she had endured, the exile into darkness that had nearly claimed her life, the transformation that had reshaped her entire existence as a direct consequence of his rejection. Yet she also recognized something genuine within his current vulnerability, an honesty that had been entirely absent during their previous interactions following her return. "Your apology means something," she said finally, "but it does not erase what happened, Damon. I am not the same woman you rejected 2 nights ago. Whatever bond fate intended between us, I am no longer certain reconciliation follows the simple path either of us might once have imagined." Damon nodded slowly, accepting her words with quiet resignation despite the clear pain crossing his features. "I understand," he said. "I do not expect forgiveness simply because I now recognize my mistake, but I hope, in time, we might find some path forward, whatever form that takes, that allows both of us to move beyond the pain of what happened." Elena considered his words carefully, feeling the ancient presence within her stir gently, offering quiet counsel rather than direct guidance regarding this deeply personal matter. Whatever wisdom 1,000 kings might possess regarding matters of empire and power, this particular decision belonged entirely to her own heart, unclouded by ancient influence or external pressure. "Perhaps," she said finally, offering no further commitment beyond this single acknowledgement. "But that path, if it exists at all, will require far more than simple words, Damon. Trust, once broken so completely, is not easily rebuilt." With that, she turned and walked toward the exit of the council hall, leaving Damon standing amid the wreckage of a confrontation that had reshaped Blackthorn's leadership, while leaving deeply personal questions about their future entirely unresolved. Whatever came next, both of them understood clearly that the path ahead remained uncertain, shaped by choices still waiting to be made. The days following Nathan's removal from the council brought a strange, uneasy calm to Blackthorn territory. Elena found herself increasingly drawn into matters of pack governance, her presence commanding respect and attention wherever she walked, though she remained careful not to overstep boundaries that were not yet fully hers to claim. Victor, now serving as acting head of the council, approached her one afternoon with a proposition that would test exactly how far she was willing to extend her newfound influence. "The pack is fractured," Victor admitted, standing before her in the quiet garden behind Grace's home where Elena had taken to spending her mornings in reflection. "Nathan's removal, while necessary, has left many wolves uncertain about leadership and direction moving forward. Some fear further instability. Others whisper that perhaps the old ways of governance are no longer sufficient given everything that has been revealed about your bloodline." "What are you suggesting, Victor?" Elena asked, studying him carefully. "I did not return to Blackthorn seeking to seize control of a pack that once rejected me so completely." "I understand that," Victor replied. "But whether you sought this position or not, your presence has already reshaped the fundamental understanding this pack holds about power and leadership. Wolves look to you now, Elena, in ways they never looked toward Damon alone. That reality exists regardless of your original intentions." Elena considered his words carefully, feeling the weight of 1,000 ancient voices stirring gently within her, patient counsel, rather than demanding pressure. She thought of Malakar's words within the ancient chamber, the purpose he had described regarding justice long overdue, and an empire's legacy waiting to be reclaimed. Perhaps, she considered, that purpose was not meant to manifest through conquest or force, but through the rebuilding of something broken, reshaped into a form more just than what had existed before her transformation. Over the following weeks, Elena found herself increasingly involved in matters extending far beyond Blackthorn's borders. She had begun each morning with a quiet ritual of her own, walking the perimeter of the village before the sun fully rose, greeting wolves as they began their daily tasks, listening to concerns that might never have reached the council otherwise. An elderly farmer worried about a failing well, a young mother concerned about her son's difficulty adjusting to his first shift, a pair of hunters debating whether the coming winter would prove harsher than the last. Elena listened to each concern with the same patient attention, understanding that true leadership required far more than displays of power. It required the willingness to see and value the smallest struggles of those she now found herself responsible for guiding. Word of her transformation had spread quickly among neighboring packs, curiosity and fear intermingling as wolves from distant territories sought to understand exactly what her awakening meant for the broader balance of power across these lands. Some approached with genuine respect, seeking alliance and understanding. Others arrived with poorly concealed hostility, viewing her as a threat requiring careful monitoring or outright opposition. One such visitor, an emissary named Vincent representing a rival pack from the Eastern Hills, arrived demanding an audience within days of her transformation becoming widely known. He entered the council hall with obvious skepticism, clearly expecting to find exaggeration rather than genuine power behind the rumors reaching his territory. Elena received him calmly, answering his pointed questions with patient honesty, rather than the intimidation he seemed to have braced himself against. Your pack has grown stronger through this development, Vincent observed carefully, studying her with sharp, assessing eyes. Should we consider Blackthorn a threat to the stability of surrounding territories? Only if you consider justice and fair governance a threat, Elena replied evenly. I have no interest in conquest, Vincent. My purpose is to ensure that no wolf within reach of my influence suffers the kind of careless cruelty I once endured. Should your pack ever require assistance against genuine threats, you will find Blackthorn a valuable ally rather than an enemy to fear. Vincent studied her for a long moment before finally nodding slowly, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. I will carry that message back to my own Alpha, he said, though I suspect it will take considerable time before every territory surrounding these lands feels equally reassured. Damon, throughout this period, remained a constant yet complicated presence in her life. He had thrown himself fully into rebuilding pack governance following Nathan's removal, working diligently to address the deeper issues within Blackthorn's leadership structure that had allowed such reckless decisions to nearly claim Elena's life. Despite his efforts, the distance between them remained, a careful, respectful space neither had yet found the courage to fully close. He had quietly ended his arrangement with Claire in the days following the confrontation with Nathan, explaining gently that his heart could not commit fully to a bond his wolf had never truly accepted. Claire, though hurt by the decision, had accepted it with quiet dignity, eventually finding her own path within the pack, separate from the complicated tangles surrounding Damon and Elena's uncertain future together. Elena had heard of this development through Grace, though she said nothing of it directly to Damon, uncertain what such news should mean for her own carefully guarded feelings. Their interactions during those early weeks remained largely professional, focused on matters of pack governance and the ongoing diplomatic outreach extending toward neighboring territories. Yet small moments of warmth began threading through these formal exchanges, a shared glance during council meetings that lingered slightly longer than necessary, a quiet word of gratitude exchanged after a particularly difficult negotiation with a skeptical neighboring envoy. Neither of them spoke openly of what these small moments might mean, content instead to let whatever existed between them grow slowly, unforced by expectation or old assumptions about fate and destiny. One evening, as autumn winds began sweeping through Blackthorn territory, Damon found Elena standing alone near the boundary markers, gazing out toward the distant tree line that led toward the forbidden woods where her entire existence had been transformed. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her despite knowing full well she had sensed his presence long before he drew close. You often come here, he observed quietly, settling beside her though maintaining a respectful distance. What draws you back to this place? Elena considered the question for a long moment before answering. It reminds me of where I truly began, she said. Not the woman rejected and humiliated in front of this entire pack, but the person I became afterward, forged through pain into something stronger than I ever imagined possible. I do not wish to forget that transformation, Damon, regardless of how uncomfortable its origins might be. Damon nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind her words even as guilt continued lingering quietly beneath his own composure. I think about that night constantly, he admitted, wondering how different everything might have been had I simply trusted my own instincts rather than allowing fear to guide my decision. Perhaps, Elena said, but dwelling on paths not taken serves little purpose now. What matters is what we choose to build from where we currently stand. He turned to study her carefully, something hopeful flickering behind his gaze despite his obvious effort to remain composed. Does that mean there might be a path forward for us, Elena? I understand if trust remains difficult to rebuild, but I would be lying if I claimed my feelings toward you had diminished, despite everything that has happened. Elena remained quiet for a long moment, weighing his words against everything she had experienced since that fateful night of rejection. She thought of the countless kings settled within her, their ancient wisdom regarding matters of power and purpose, yet recognized clearly that matters of the heart belonged to her alone, unclouded by external influence regardless of its source. I do not know what the future holds for us, she said finally, her voice steady despite the vulnerability underlying her words. But I am willing to discover that answer slowly, without rushing toward conclusions neither of us can yet fully trust. Damon nodded, accepting her measured response with quiet gratitude, understanding that whatever path lay ahead would require patience and genuine effort, rather than simple declarations of regret. As they stood together near the boundary of Blackthorn territory, watching the sun set slowly over lands that had witnessed both her greatest humiliation and her extraordinary transformation, Elena felt something shift quietly within her chest. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps the first tentative steps toward a future she had never imagined possible, only weeks earlier. Behind them, Unseen within the ancient ruins deep within the Forbidden Woods, the countless spirits of 1,000 kings continued their patient watch, waiting to see exactly what their reawakened sovereign would choose to build from the ashes of her rejection, and exactly what legacy she would ultimately leave behind for the generations still waiting to come. Winter arrived slowly across Blackthorn territory, bringing with it a sense of stability that had seemed impossible only months earlier. Elena stood before the assembled council, no longer merely a returning outcast seeking acknowledgement, but a recognized authority, whose voice carried weight in every significant decision affecting the pack's future. Victor, now formally established as head of the council, watched her with quiet respect as she addressed matters that would once have been entirely beyond her reach. "The neighboring territories continue sending envoys," she said, addressing the gathered council members with calm authority. "Some seek alliance, understanding that the balance of power across these lands has shifted permanently. Others remain wary, uncertain how to approach a pack now connected to bloodlines and powers older than any wolf territory currently existing." Derek, who had grown increasingly comfortable working alongside Elena since Nathan's departure, spoke up thoughtfully. "How do you intend to address those who view your presence as a threat rather than an opportunity for genuine partnership?" Elena considered the question carefully, feeling the ancient wisdom within her offer quiet counsel, rather than demanding direction. "Through patience," she said finally, "and through demonstrating that power does not require conquest or domination to prove itself legitimate. I did not awaken this bloodline seeking to rule through fear, Derek. I intend to prove that strength can exist alongside genuine justice." The council members exchanged approving glances, the earlier uncertainty that had followed Nathan's dramatic removal, gradually replaced by growing confidence in the direction Elena and Victor were guiding Blackthorn's future together. Whatever fears had once driven desperate actions against her, those fears had slowly transformed into genuine respect, as her actions consistently demonstrated restraint and wisdom rather than the tyranny some had initially anticipated. Later that evening, Elena found herself once again standing near the boundary markers where she had spoken with Damon months earlier, watching snow begin falling gently across the quiet fields surrounding Blackthorn territory. He joined her there, as had become their quiet custom during these peaceful evening hours, the distance between them having gradually narrowed through months of careful, patient rebuilding. "The council meeting went well," Damon observed, settling beside her with the comfortable familiarity that had slowly developed between them since that difficult confrontation following Nathan's betrayal. "You have transformed this pack in ways I never could have imagined possible, Elena." "We have transformed it together," she corrected gently, offering him a small smile that carried genuine warmth rather than the careful reservation that had characterized their early interactions. "You rebuilt trust within this council just as much as I brought new understanding regarding my bloodline's true nature." Damon studied her for a long moment, something soft and hopeful flickering behind his expression. "Elena, I know we agreed to let this path unfold slowly, without rushing toward conclusions neither of us could trust. But I find myself wondering if perhaps enough time has passed for us to consider what comes next between us." Elena felt the ancient voices within her stir gently, not directing her decision, but offering quiet acknowledgement of the genuine growth she had witnessed within Damon over these many months. He had rebuilt himself alongside the pack, learning humility and wisdom through the consequences of his earlier mistakes, proving through consistent action rather than simple words that he had truly changed. "Perhaps it has," she said softly, turning to face him fully for the first time in months without the careful reservation that had once guarded her heart so completely. "I am not the same woman you rejected that night, Damon. I carry the strength of 1,000 ancient kings within me now. Responsibilities and purposes far beyond what either of us could have imagined possible before that fateful ceremony." "I know," Damon replied quietly, "and I do not seek to diminish that transformation, or ask you to become someone smaller simply to fit within expectations that no longer apply to who you have become. I only hope, if you are willing, that we might build something new together, shaped by everything we have both learned, rather than what once existed between us before everything changed." Elena considered his words carefully, feeling genuine warmth spread through her chest for the first time since that devastating night of rejection. Whatever path lay ahead, she understood clearly now that her strength no longer depended upon acceptance from anyone, including Damon. Yet choosing to build something new with him, freely and without desperation, felt entirely different from the broken need that had once defined her feelings before her transformation. "Then let us discover that path together," she said finally, "not because destiny demands it, but because we both choose it freely." Grace visited often during those quiet winter months, marveling at how completely her closest friend had transformed the very fabric of Blackthorn's future. She had watched Elena's transformation unfold from the very beginning, From the broken woman who had stumbled back from exile, to the composed, respected leader now shaping the pack's entire future. And she often found herself struck by how naturally Elena seemed to carry the weight of such enormous responsibility. "Do you ever think about that night differently now?" she asked one afternoon, as the two of them sat together near a warm fire inside Elena's newly appointed quarters within the council hall. "The rejection that started all of this. Does it still hurt the way it once did?" Elena considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "It hurts less with each passing day," she admitted. "Not because the pain never happened, but because I have built something meaningful from its ashes. I think, perhaps, that is the only way any of us truly heal from moments that break us completely. We do not erase the pain. We simply build something stronger around it." Grace smiled warmly, reaching over to squeeze her friend's hand gently. "Whatever ancient kings live within you now, Elena. I still see the same woman who once sat beside me dreaming of a future she believed impossible. I am glad that woman found her way back, even if she carries far more strength than either of us could have imagined possible back then." As winter settled fully over Blackthorn territory, Elena Voss stood transformed in every sense of the word, no longer the rejected daughter of a fallen bloodline cast into darkness, but the reawakened heir of an ancient sovereign line, ruling not through fear or conquest, but through wisdom earned from her greatest pain. The 1,000 kings bound within her had found in her exactly what they had waited centuries to discover, a leader capable of building justice from betrayal, strength from rejection, and ultimately, a future brighter than anything the old empire had ever achieved. Whatever challenges still awaited her beyond these peaceful winter fields, Elena understood clearly that she now faced them not as someone broken by circumstance, but as the powerful, wise ruler her ancestors had always known she was destined to become.